Rivera. I'm the hearing examiner presiding over today's case. The date is September 4th, 2024, and this is case DCI2022-00067. It is a rezoning request to the RPD district and the Northeast Lee County Planning Community. Because it is a quasi-judicial hearing, all evidence and testimony must be taken under oath. So if you intend to speak, if you could please raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you will provide is the truth?
I do.
Thank you. So the way that we're going to proceed this morning is first we're going to hear from the applicant. They're going to present their request in the case and call any witnesses that they may have. Following that, we're going to hear from the county staff, who's going to present their review and recommendation in this case. They are recommending approval with conditions and some deviations. After that, that's when I will call forward the cards that I have for the public comment section. At that time, there is only one opportunity to speak, so please take notes as we go through things this morning so that you can make the most of your time when you come up to the podium. If you intend to speak at the board hearing on this matter, you must speak at the hearing today, and the comments that you make at the board will be limited to the comments that you make today. There is no time limitation for today's comments, but when you speak at the board, they do impose a limitation on the time at that point. With that, I believe, wait one second. Oh, if you have questions, please be sure that you ask those when you come to the podium, but realize that we are probably not going to answer those at the time that you ask them, but we will be saving that for the rebuttal. So once we close public comment, we come back to the applicant and the staff for their rebuttal. They'll address the questions at that time before they make their closing comments in this case. And if you did fill out a public comment card but you do not want to speak today, you can indicate that as well, and you will receive a copy of the recommendation that I release to the board before it goes to their final hearing. So with that, did staff have a notice of publication to enter into the record?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I'll take it. Thank you. I'll mark that as Staff Exhibit 2. Staff Exhibit 1 is the staff report. Okay, and I am ready whenever the applicant is ready to proceed. Good morning.
That's what I was going to ask. Because we passed it last night. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, Neil Montgomery for the record. I do, before we start, want to kind of make a point of order that all the documents that were provided to you by the staff, that they would all be part of the record.
The staff report is what I have as Staff Exhibit 1.
Well, and there's other attachments in that package.
In the package that was the staff report? Yes, everything that's cohesive to the staff report with all attachments.
Okay. So with us today, we have several people, and I want to make sure, for the record again, that all the experts are noted in the record as experts. The applicant is Mr. Neal. He's here today. I'm Neil Montgomery. Alexis Crespo is here as an expert in planning. Will Hellman is here as an expert in landscape architecture. Brandon Fry is here as an expert in civil engineering. Mr. Treesh is here as an expert in transportation planning. Shane Johnson is here as an expert ecologist, and Kirk Martin is here as an expert in hydrology. Are you going to talk about this?
I'm going to talk about it.
And Mr. Neal is here with us and to give us a brief overview of all the things that they've accomplished.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. My name is Pat Neal, and I'm leading the team which is the applicant today. We are the largest privately held developer in Southwest Florida. We've built about 23,000 homes, primarily in Sarasota and Manatee County, though we've built here in Lee County for about 12 years. We build mostly, in fact, almost entirely master planned communities, and we believe that we're experts in creative placemaking. I believe I said we've built about 23,000 homes, about 12 in Lee County. We have a very high consumer satisfaction rate, about 93%. I will also say that I've won every environmental award made to members of the legislature. I was the chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, created the Carl Fund, wrote our state's first wetland law in 1983. Today, we'll make a very strong presentation based on competent and substantial evidence. And I will say that we will demonstrate that building 1,099 units on a public sewer system is a far better result for Lee County than the equivalent 788 homes built scattered with septic, with well and septic. We brought a very strong professional team that will be led by Alexis Crespo, who I think is our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it you, Alexis? Or is it you, Neil? I guess it's Neil Montgomery who's going to talk.
The request before you today is a request to rezone 788 acres from AG2 to RPD to allow for a maximum of 1,099 dwelling units and private on-site recreational uses and infrastructure. The maximum height is 35 feet. That's a standard height for single-family homes throughout Lee County. The site will connect to centralized water and sewer services. There was a prior comp plan amendment to allow for that extension, and the Board of County Commissioners has on several occasions indicated strong support for moving people off of well and septic onto central water and sewer because of the improvement to water quality and because of the concerns about the BMAP and the condition of the Caloosahatchee River. We are not asking for a change to the future land use category. The property is in the rural land use category. You'll hear more about that later. There is a policy, 29.2.4, that allows for incentive density. That's through the preservation, creation, or restoration of rare and unique. And again, you'll hear more about that later from our expert. The site is go east, head north on 31, where all the gas stations are. You make a right on North River Road. And as you look at this area, you can see to the north of the property, both in Lee County and in Charlotte County, Babcock Ranch, which is a prominent feature now in the area. You can also see Owl Creek and other things that have been approved. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our expert in planning and zoning, Alexis Crespo.
Good morning. For the record, Alexis Crespo with RVI Planning and Landscape Architecture. I have been accepted as an expert in the Lee Plan, the Lee County Land Development Code, and land use planning in general. Would, as Neil said, like to be accepted again today.
Yes, thank you.
I'll also note Jim France, our Director of Planning in Bonita Springs, has also worked heavily on the project and may be supplementing presentation today as well. I'm going to start with a look at the subject property on the Lee County Future Land Use Map. You can see the property outlined in yellow. The lands to the south of North River Road are generally in that rural future land use category, allowing 1 unit per acre. North of the property, also within the North Olga area, you have a large blue tract, which is the Babcock Ranch MPD, those lands within Lee County that total about 4,200 acres. And that was converted in 2018 to that future land use category and removing it from the DRGR future land use category. So the last remaining DRGR in this area is to our immediate north on the north side of North River Road. The remaining area is rural, as noted. The other key aspect on this map is that conservation lands, there's uplands, and then the darker green is conservation lands, wetlands. Those are publicly owned preserve lands. So when you look at this immediate area, you do have portions of low density and rural development. You have emerging new community development in Babcock, and then the county and the state has done a wonderful job of putting a lot of the land in this area in long-term permanent conservation, and that would be in the form of the Bob James Preserve, which is the largest Lee County preserve, and then you have other smaller 2020 properties in the area. As Neil noted, and as we'll walk you through today, this RPD is consistent with the rural future land use classification. We're not proposing to amend or exit the rural future land use and live within the limits it provides for. Another aspect of the Lee Plan framework that's important to note is the subject property was brought into the county's future water and sewer service area just earlier this year. So we had a companion comprehensive plan amendment that moved quicker than our zoning application, and it was decided by the Board of County Commissioners this was an appropriate location to allow for the expansion of centralized water and sewer. A lot of the reasoning for that was to mitigate and prevent hundreds of septic tanks on this property. It's in very close proximity to the Caloosahatchee River. You'll hear from experts later the environmental impacts that could have, and that was, again, approved earlier this year. You can see on the slide as well, immediately to our west, the Owl Creek property is also in the Lee County Utility Service area for water. This is a look at the area from your community planning perspective. Lee County has a strong history of grassroots community planning activities where they've been incorporated into the Lee Plan, as well in some cases the Land Development Code, which is the case in North Olga. The subject property is generally depicted with that blue star, and we are wholly within the North Olga community planning area. That shares common policies with Northeast Lee County that includes both Alva and North Olga, which we'll speak to today as well. From a zoning standpoint, there has been the conversion of lands to planned development in this area, starting with the Babcock MPD in the red to the north. So that was approved in approximately 2018, 2019. That was an opportunity for Lee County to shift some of the already approved commercial intensity that was going to be developed in Charlotte County under that DRI and shift it into Lee County to achieve some of that tax base and achieve local goods and services for some of the folks, not only within the project, but also in the general community. And so that zoning allows for 1,630 dwelling units, as well as 1.17 million square feet of commercial uses, which are oriented to the north part of the project. Does this work? It does. Okay. Those uses would go more northern, and then the residential uses would be intermittent through the project.
You may get into density calculations later, but the applicant narrative said that was 2.5 units per acre on that Babcock piece. Is that correct?
No, it is 1 unit per 2.5 acres.
Okay, that's what I thought, because I did the math and I couldn't get that to work out either, but I read it a few times. Okay.
And that was a DRGR future land use map amendment, so that was at 1 unit per 10 acres. The intent for the project was it is over 60% preserve, and so to have low density residential and then the commercial uses.
Okay, thank you.
To our immediate west is the Owl Creek RPD in purple. That was the first project approved in this area that utilized the rare and unique bonus density allowed in rural. It was a mechanism for landowners to achieve very, in my professional opinion, slight increases in density within the rural future land use category that typically only allows 1 unit per acre. So again, allowing a nominal increase in exchange for much higher preservation requirements, and not only just preservation, but upland rare and unique habitat preservation. Not just saving the wetlands that you have to save anyway, but really restoring impacted pasture farmlands and improving the area, and also done to help with rural character protection, because native trees is one of the, I think, largest components of relating rural character, especially in this area. Then you'll also note, kind of moving to the west, almost you can see a black arrow pointing to the red square. That is the Babcock mixed-use plan development that was also approved in the past 4 years or so, and that fronts on the State Road 31 corridor. So there are several PDs within this area that have either utilized a new community framework and or the rural bonus incentive density framework through the PD process. Getting a little bit more granular on our surrounding uses. The subject property itself, you can see, is partially vegetated. It has a tributary running through it that we'll discuss is being fully protected. It's long been in the families of the owners and used for cattle grazing predominantly, as well as other agricultural uses. To our south, we have single-family residential on larger lots that line the south side of Duke Highway. There is a ag zone property here, but there is no existing single-family structure. So all of our rural neighbors to the south are separated by the Duke Highway right-of-way. We also have North Olga Drive that gets off North River Road, and we have some single-family residences in this area. To the east is largely 2020 property. Again, we have that large Bob James Preserve that's over 5,000 acres permanently in conservation. We have agricultural property known as the Broadlands that's still zoned Ag 2. And then it changes as you move north and to the west. To the north, we have the Babcock Ranch MPD. Due to sensitive design, those lands are intended for preserve along North River Road. We looked at that application in designing our site as one of the key focuses of that was to keep the North River Road and all public frontages as natural vegetation so that the development would not be visible and impactful to the rural character. Then as you move further west, you have the Owl Creek PD, and then, as I noted, the Mike Greenwell plan development. And within those, you have some intermittent Ag 2 zone properties. This is Serenoa Court, where one of the property owners lives. And then largely these lands to the south are either privately owned or under water management district ownership. Just giving you an inventory of those densities and intensities surrounding us. We've kind of covered this, but to our north, we have the Babcock MPD, which is 1,630 units, just under 1.2 of commercial. This is a larger view where you can see the full town of Babcock Ranch in Charlotte County that was approved over 2 decades ago, or almost 2 decades ago, again by Charlotte County as a DRI plan development that's well underway. You can see clearly the infrastructure and development areas that are coming online there. And that certainly created development pressures on this area that allows for 17,870 dwelling units in Charlotte County alone. The 1,630 in Lee would be in addition to that. Charlotte County can have another 4.8 million square feet of non-residential, as well as hotel, ALF, hospital beds. So a proper new town being developed in this immediate area to the north. The Owl Creek PD is approved for 380 dwelling units. Again, that's using the rural future land use and incentive restoration bonus there to achieve that. It also is approved for 96 boat slips because it does have some nice Caloosahatchee riverfront access. Lastly, Greenwell MPD is largely commercial in nature. It's 400,000 square feet of commercial, intended to serve the area and kind of as an extension of some of the commercial uses in Babcock. There's also a residential component with that at 122 units. In terms of infrastructure availability, we have, as part of this process, both the comp plan for the water and sewer and also for the zoning, we've had to obtain letters of availability from the sheriff's office, from our school district, solid waste, Bayshore Fire District has provided a letter of availability. We did not have to get a Lee-Tran letter as there's no Lee-Tran facilities in this area. Something important to note on the slide there is the future Shirley Lane fire EMS station. This was I believe a 3-acre site conveyed by Kitson or the developer of Babcock to Lee County it is, per a developer's agreement, it must be conveyed by the end of the year. There are funds earmarked for construction of the EMS based on information we received from Kitson. So the county does intend to move forward with that. And long-term, the goal is to be an integrated fire EMS station that we should, certainly the EMS component coming online before homes in the proposed RPD. Now, with all that context, I'm going to start walking you through our proposed master concept plan. This is an illustrative version of the plan to make it a little bit more visible what we're looking at. This is, again, 788 acres, so note that in terms of the scale of the, as you were looking at this, we have 3 points of ingress egress to the project. This was something we met with Duke Highway residents prior to even filing, and then the very first thing that was asked was, do not have any access on Duke Highway. We had a secondary residents-only access on a very preliminary version of the plan, which they were very adamant that we remove, and we trimmed it back and even eliminated even any option for emergency or construction access. No trips are going to be coming into this or out of this project from Duke Highway or traveling along North Olga Drive. It's all oriented to North River Road. We did have to get a deviation for this access point because while the project overall has more than the 2 access points required, this pod technically only has 1, but we worked with Bayshore Fire to obtain a letter of no objection regarding that. So with our 3 access points, then as you're noting along the frontage, we've located lakes and very large swaths of preserve areas along that frontage. I'm going to walk you through the dimensions of these preserve areas, as I think that's very, very critical to our compliance with the clustering and compact development provisions in your LEED plan, is really maximizing and sensitively locating those preserve areas so that we can keep our development footprint very small and based on our line of sight, we'll show you, not visible to the traveling public. We have located 2 separate amenities within the project to provide a high-quality community and on-site rec for future residents. We also sensitively located those so they would not be on any perimeters, as those can produce noise, light, and visual impacts to neighbors. So we were very careful in their locations. We have no crossing of this creek. At one point in time, we were examining linking the 2 development areas, but we elected to not proceed with any type of crossing, and also worked diligently with the county on a maintenance easement so that they will have long-term access to this area of the site in order to clear overgrown brush, things that can really help when hurricanes hit and waterways aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we've worked that out, which we'll address in our later slides. So the other thing I hope that jumps out is just the expansive amount of green on the slide. We have 60% open space. 50% of the site is the preservation, either in the form of wetland preservation or creation and restoration of upland native habitat. I noted no Duke Highway access. The minimum setback for that closest residential tract to Duke Highway is 170 feet. Will Hellman is going to walk you through the characteristics of that buffer and the visual impact to Duke Highway upon clearing of all the exotics, installing our buffer, and installing the required restoration planning. So I hope that will be of interest to you as well as of the public that's here and obviously concerned about their quality of life. We will be required to install an 8-foot shared use path. That's part of the North Olga community plan to allow for better connectivity. As part of our enhanced buffering along the roadway, we will be installing canopy trees as well, so that will make for a nice environment along the roadway and just a safer way to travel. Also providing, better connection to the 2020 preserves in the area will also be an asset.
So, sorry, can you go back for 1 second?
Yes.
So is the intent to do a unified development, but the application keeps talking about these separate pods. So you've got pod 1 that has its dedicated access because you can't cross over Trout Creek, and then pods 2 and 3, are they going to essentially operate as a unified development, or is it going to be bifurcated more so that they're not accessing each other? So can folks that live in pod 1 access the amenity center on pod 2?
That is an excellent question, and I'm going to have to defer to someone with Neal Communities to answer that.
Okay, and those amenity centers, if you can also just describe briefly, there's community garden requirements and things in the lead plan that I know were discussed and promised that that's going to be included, but if you can just, I didn't ever see what that's going to look like, just a general intent that you would capture internally the folks within the community so that you're not generating interest that these folks are having to go out into the greater Olga community to partake in those kind of activities. So if you could just give me some, it doesn't have to be now, but I've got those questions.
The intent would be for active and passive rec. So Neal Community does a lot of dog parks and passive pocket park areas throughout the project. The amenity campuses would be your clubhouse or at least cabana type facility with restrooms, pool, sports courts, playground, tot lot type, those types of infrastructure. But there would be an active rec component. Okay. And we will address you on if this will be separately branded or if all residents will be able to use both. I'm just going to walk through the deviations here. We are asking for 1 point of ingress egress for that western pod. The justification is eliminating a crossing of a creek and associated wetlands that would be negatively impactful to the environment. This is for a relatively small area, and we did receive letters of no objection from all the required agencies, including the fire district, sheriff's office, and Lee County Public Safety, and the zoning staff has also recommended approval. Deviation 2 relates to our roadway buffers. Our intent through the site plan is to locate our restoration upland native habitat along those roadways so that it's a natural look. It's not that manicured Fort Myers look, but this is going to be your live oak, cabbage palm, things of that nature to really maintain a rural character along the roadway. Staff has recommended approval with a condition of some supplementary plantings that we are in agreement with, and they have recommended approval.
Are there on that, I had a question on deviation 2 and how it relates to condition 11, because condition 11 recites the 33-1673 requirements that deviation 2 is deviating from. So is the deviation, there's indications on the master concept plan at intervals, but I'm not clear on if it's running the entirety of the North River Road frontage or if it's only at those isolated spots where it's noted.
It would be for the entirety of the North River Road frontage where necessary.
Okay, so then we just need to earmark, put a note on 11. I'm not sure if we need that if we're deviating from it in 2. And I may be missing something, but I want to get clarity on that before we.
Let me go to condition 11. The intent, and I'm sure staff will speak to this, the intent of deviation 11 is if what we plant doesn't meet the specs of, because we're saying we want to do the native restoration in lieu of a type D buffer, I believe the condition is, yeah, but those restoration plantings have to be big enough, tall enough, spaced close enough so that they're meeting all the requirements of the buffer, so that we're not losing any plant material through allowing this deviation, because that's not the intent. The intent is to enhance and increase the plant material in that buffer through the native restoration. It just wouldn't be delineated as a type D buffer has like a hedgerow and things like that. So, but 11 is to make sure we're not reducing any plantings.
Okay.
All right. Deviation 3 is to allow for a 4-to-1 lake bank slope. The code does provide guidance on mitigating materials to prevent erosion with this type of cross-section of lake. Our goal with this deviation was, again, to reduce the development footprint. When you have the 6-to-1 lake bank slopes requires a lot of sodded area to achieve that slope. We can achieve a functional lake that has a smaller footprint that correlates to more open space preserve areas that can be planted with that native restoration. And staff, based on the cross-section provided, has recommended approval. Deviation 4 is to allow certain equipment, your AC pad, pool pump, and different types of equipment to be located up to 4.5 feet into the side yards. This used to not require a deviation, from my understanding, and Brandon Frey, our engineer, can speak to this in more detail, but it's more of a housekeeping to memorialize this can occur. The units, this type of equipment is typically staggered on different sides of the home. In the case of if a twin villa or an attached product is done, there will be encroachments on both sides, but they will be separated substantially, so they're not, touching or interfacing with each other. And staff has routinely approved this on other projects and have recommended approval. Deviation 5 is when we worked out, again, it came up a little bit later in our review where staff said, hey, we really need to be able to access this creek system in case we want to get storm ready or just overall, make sure it's being maintained properly, as it impacts more properties than just ours. So we worked with them on providing a reduced easement width. The intent there is to maximize the preservation areas. So it's required to be 20 feet in width. It's rational to think that within an easement intended for maintenance of a creek system, you may go in and clear all that vegetation to access the tributary or to make necessary improvements. Our goal was to minimize the area, to allow the access, allow the necessary maintenance, but reduce the amount of potential areas for removing vegetation in that area to, again, maximize preserve on site. And so staff felt they could work within that 10-foot easement to sufficiently maintain the creek system.
Okay, so it's 10 foot and not 20 foot?
Correct.
It's confusing on the master concept plan because it shows 20-foot wide Trout Creek easement, and then it has the deviation signal for deviation 5, which ties it, but that might require clarification.
We can, oh, is this, oh, okay. It's because it's 20 foot in the southern portion, we can't achieve the 20 feet in certain areas. It's in the narrowest location is where it is.
Okay, so the deviation is keyed there, but it doesn't actually apply to that easement. It applies only to the northern one?
Correct. I'm sure we will leave the record open for some minor changes so we can remove deviation 5 by the 20-foot label. Good catch.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that concludes the deviation summary. And to kind of summarize the master concept plan, our proposed design standards, and the water and wastewater approval granted by the board earlier this year, our proposal will eliminate the potential for 788 homes that can be built by right today in the ag zoning district, eliminating that type of, I would consider it, sprawling land use pattern that would connect to private well and septic without rezoning approval being needed. The design protects the nearby well fields in the area, as we'll detail in later slides, improve flood management from the lake system, the storage, and reduced runoff from the site. We do have 60% open space, so almost 484 acres of this site of 788 acres are going to be green space. And I think more importantly, 50% of the site is going to be actual preserve area, wetland or upland preserve. So I did have to explain this to the community because it's a little confusing that the 50% is within that 60. So 40% will be developed, 60% will be in green space, and of that, the 50% will actually be vegetated. Of that vegetation, we are restoring 328 acres of rare and unique upland habitat, which Shane will walk you through the planting plan of how we do that. But this area is beautiful, but it's impacted pasture that's been grazed for decades. And so restoring habitat for species in the area, better view sheds we see as a huge benefit of this application. We also have some wetlands on the site, the bulk of which are being preserved. Our density calc does take that into effect, which I'll show you. And we are protecting the Trout Creek and Otter Creek floodplains through our design. Compatibility is, I think, really central to this case. This is the rural future land use category. We are remaining in the rural future land use category. We are consistent with the Lee Plan's policies relating to development in rural future land use in terms of the types of dwelling units, the density proposed, and the restoration to achieve the 0.4 unit per acre increase. Our perimeter setbacks range in feet from 160 up to 800 plus feet in width. That I'll show you on the next slide. We have limited our access to North River Road to eliminate any traffic onto North Olga or Duke Highway to preserve character in those communities. We have limited the building height to 35 feet, so this is not going to be denser residential product, but just single family attached or detached. And then I've noticed or noted the expansive open space. So I'll walk you through those setbacks here, and then will further show you what those will look like. So our nearest residential track to North River Road in that western pod is 300 feet. Some of that is obviously lake, and then the other portion will be our restoration preserve area along the frontage. As you move east, logically, we thought increasing those setbacks as you move east, it generally gets more rural in nature as you move away from the 31 corridor. So those now increase to 510 feet, again, of dedicated preserve area that will be placed under conservation easement at the time of DO. Then as you move to the North River Road eastern portion, the setback once again increases to 800 feet in width. I would submit to you that with 800 feet of restoration and plantings, you will not be able to perceive a single family home within this project as you're traveling back to your home on North River Road or North Olga Drive or Duke Highway. To the south, we have a 160-foot setback. And then as we move south and east, 380 feet of setback, again, all in native preserve. And then along Duke Highway, we are providing 170 feet of setback in that area. Our pinch point is that 60-foot at the southwest corner of the site. That property is undeveloped, and it is the closest property to the site clearly, but still substantial setbacks far above and beyond any requirements of the code. The typical PD setback in this case would be 15 feet approximately, and so this is exponentially larger than any code requirement for structural setbacks. And then from Serenoa Court, we have a minimum 420-foot setback in those areas along with the preserve, as well as 400 from that vantage point as well. You had asked about our density calculation, so we certainly worked on this with staff to make sure, because it's a fairly complex with the restoration, but we have partial rural and partial wetland areas. We have some wetland impacts that basically generate no density. Our preserved wetlands generate about 51 units. The rural at 1 unit per acre generates, rounding up, 719 units. And then through our recreation, restoration, and preservation of rare and unique, we garnered another 329 units to arrive at 1,099 units. And this is consistent with your rural future land use policies as well as your wetland density calculation policies.
So just to pause here for a second, there was a question, it seemed like in the community meeting notes that folks at all three of the meetings that you had were asking if there was the opportunity to come back and increase this density in some way. But my understanding of the rare and unique habitat is that these areas are going to be perpetually conserved, either under conservation easement or preservation requirements within the zoning. So is there any opportunity for you to come back and increase that number or alter those calculations?
We would, in order to do that, we would have to go through a full public hearing process. And you can see from our plan that we've really maximized where we can fit that preserve. So that would involve reducing the development footprint to convert more, we'd have to reduce our development area to get more density. And so while we get more units on paper, we couldn't build them unless we went to townhome product or some type of dwelling unit that can fit on a smaller lot or is more efficient. And I would submit that those dwelling types would not be meeting all the criteria for rural and North Olga community. So it is possible, we can always ask. We have not asked to do that. This is what Neal Communities intends to build.
But the conservation easement, that will be ironclad. You won't be able to develop those. And how many acres is that?
In total, 420 will be under conservation easement. There's a lot of numbers here, but.
I know, and then the additional, is the 300 that's used as the upland preserves, is that including the conservation easement acreage?
So we have to put all of our preserve, whether it's rare and unique or wetlands, in a conservation easement per the lead plan. So the number that will be under permanent conservation easement is 420 acres. So it will be above and beyond. It's not just the rare unique, it's all preserves go under conservation easement. It
does answer my question. There's like 10 criteria, I think, under rare and unique upland, and it's so specific about what has to happen on the acres that you are essentially pulling the density from to utilize to get the extra density. I know that that's not what's really happening, but in concept that it kind of is a TDR-ish program. So I'm trying to ensure. It seems like you can't double dip on that acre. So if you're using those acres as the base to get the rare and unique upland habitat, I don't think that you would then have the opportunity necessarily to come back, and you can't touch the 420 acres. So those are already set aside.
Yeah, we would, like I said, we would have to remove some of the area from the yellow. We'd have to convert what's now yellow residential to preserve in order to get any more, because yes, we have exactly what we need to achieve the 1,099 units, and any increase would require more preserve, which
you would run out of space at some point.
We have no space.
And with your height required limitations as well. Okay.
We found it everywhere we could, so yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Back there. All right, so I am going to turn it over to Will Hellman. He is a registered landscape architect, and he has line of sight depictions from these kind of, I think, really critical areas of when you first start seeing the property visibly as you're moving east on North River Road, as you curve down North Olga Drive, and then certainly Duke Highway. So,
thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
we have a book with our PowerPoint and the
Oh,
master
thank you.
concept
Yes, I don't
plans.
have that. So I've got applicant Exhibit A was the 48-hour letter. That's all I have so far. Thank you. So this will be applicant Exhibit 1 is the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you for that.
And that also contains a revised 48-hour letter that we will address.
Okay.
Did I take your stuff?
Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Will Hellman. I'm a professional landscape architect with RVI Planning and Landscape Architecture. I've previously been accepted by the Lee County Hearing Examiner as an expert witness and would request to be accepted again today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, starting out demonstrating our setback and landscape buffer conditions along Duke Highway to the south of the project. The minimum is setback as shown is 190 feet, which includes 210 feet, 170 feet of preserve and 20 feet of setback for a total of 190 feet of separation from the Duke Highway right-of-way and the nearest structure, accessory structure on the project site. The existing conditions along Duke Highway are existing native vegetation as well as exotic invasives, which you can see in the image below on the bottom part of the screen. Excuse me, the nerves are getting the best of me right now. Existing landscape does include mature native canopy trees as well as cabbage palms. To enhance the preserve, the rare and unique upland plantings are depicted on this section elevation, as well as the more mature landscape in closer proximity to Duke Highway.
So just to clarify, I'm sorry, is the photo that's at the bottom, is that the existing conditions, or is that a rendering of what the proposed?
That is a recent photo of the existing conditions from Duke Highway looking to the northeast towards the project.
Okay, thank you.
This second slide for Duke Highway demonstrates the line of sight. So at a viewing point of 6 feet, standing in the Duke Highway center lane, looking towards the project site, you can see that with the existing native vegetation, as well as the 170 feet of restored rare and unique upland plantings, that the structures will not be visible from Duke Highway. Moving up to the northwest portion of the site along North River Road, this is our narrowest setback along North River Road, 405 feet from the right-of-way to the closest structure, which includes a minimum of 68 feet of buffer as well as lake depth. This portion of the project site currently does not contain native vegetation. It's currently existing pasture land and is part of the rare and unique upland restoration plantings. This will be filled in with native plantings, and additionally our buffer deviations include the planting of 14-foot height native canopy trees within the first 25 feet of the property boundary. That's important to note on this next slide here. The larger trees closer to the right-of-way provide a stronger buffering effect for the line of sight. Again, it is a 6-foot height line of sight looking in towards the project site. And finally, North Olga Drive. This is our largest setback. It is 810 feet, which includes 790 feet of preserve. This is also a portion of the site where there's minimal existing native vegetation, is primarily pasture land, and would receive a similar treatment or the same treatment with the rare and unique upland plantings and the upsized 14-foot height native canopy trees within the first 25 feet adjacent to the property boundary, the right-of-way. And again, the planting of those upsized native canopy trees within the first 25 feet of the project boundary maximize that line of sight into the project site. And most notably here with the 800 feet, as Alexis had noted, there will be no visibility onto the developed site from North Olga Road. And as far as the proposed plantings for the buffer goes, I will let Shane speak to it in more detail, but they are consistent with the ecologist's report on the indigenous native plant communities and include plants as well as additional plants as shown on the screen that maintain and enhance the rural character of the project site as well as add aesthetic value to the area and offer wildlife habitat. In conclusion, it is my professional opinion that the Cary+Duke+Povia RPD has met and or exceeded all the applicable standards and demonstrated consistency with the Lee Plan and Land Development Code. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Ted Shreesh with TR Transportation Consultants. Just to briefly go over the traffic study that was prepared as part of this application. Just summarizing this, also included in the staff report, I believe it's attachment Q in the staff report, is staff's memorandum that summarizes our analysis as well. This table summarizes the trip generation that compares the proposed zoning that's before you this morning to the trip generation of the property as it could be developed today. As Alexis indicated, the property could be developed with the 788 single-family units based on the existing zoning. This just shows the trip generation of the project. The top line is currently proposed. The second line is based on the single-family dwelling units based on the current zoning. And then the last line is just the trip generation difference based on the two comparisons. Obviously, we did our analysis based on the top line, which is the worst case, based on the 1,099 single-family dwelling units, even though this project includes a mix of two-family attached and single-family. The TIS was based on the worst case, which is all single-family dwelling units. A single-family home is shown to generate higher trip generation. So per the county guidelines, we're required to do it based on the worst case at this point in time.
Do you know what the difference is between a normal generation rate for a two-family attached to a single-family?
Based on daily trip generation, a single family is just under 10 trips per day based on the ITE trip generation manual. Two-family attached is just slightly under. I believe it's around 7.5, 8 trips a day, so it's just a little less.
Okay.
In terms of trip generation.
So when you're evaluating this conservatively, you're overestimating what the ultimate trip generation is expected to be?
Yes. And again, as this project moves forward, if approved, we have to do another traffic study once the project applies for a development order. At that time, the building product is known by the developer, and then we know exactly what the project is going to entail. And we can determine a more accurate trip generation based on the ITE. That's when we determine the off-site improvements are going to be needed along North River Road, and I can talk about that in a minute. As Alexis indicated, the access is proposed directly to North River Road. We've got 3 access drives proposed. The western access is servicing that isolated pod, and then the 2 eastern access drives serves the majority of the units that serves those 2 pods to the east. The future level service analysis we looked at, North River Road is shown to be a level service B without the project at build out, and level service C with the project at the build out. We looked at also different roadways in the study network, State Route 78, State Route 31. As you're aware, there's improvements underway on State Route 31 in conjunction with FDOT and the Babcock Ranch Improvement District. State Route 31 is currently moving forward with construction from Babcock Ranch down to State Route 78 right now as part of the Babcock Improvement District. The second phase is that FDOT is picking up is from State Route 78 down to State Route 80. That project is just wrapping up the PD&E study. And throughout this process, we've been monitoring that project, and we've been informed through FDOT that that project is now proceeded to the funding stage, the right-of-way and construction. FDOT has indicated the construction of that second project from 78 down to State Route 80 is now funded for construction in fiscal year 2029 to begin construction. So Those improvements will be constructed most likely before this project will be built out.
Is the timeline on the four-laning, I think I read 2025, is that correct?
On which project?
On the four-laning that's
Yes.
happening?
On 31, yes.
Right, 2025, okay, thank you.
And that also includes improvements to the intersection of North River Road as in State Route 78. Right now, that intersection is a traffic signal, and FDOT is has improvements to that intersection as well as part of their improvement project. This is right from the FDOT website for the State Route 78 project. This is kind of a unique intersection improvement project that they've got proposed for State Route 78. This is what they call an R-cut intersection. North is to your right on this drawing. North River Road is coming out to the bottom of the aerial. The 7-Eleven is on the top. The existing 31, you can see, is on the very top, just off of the green. That's the existing 31. The new 31 will be approximately several hundred feet to the east. So as you're coming westbound on River Road to go south, you'll actually make a right turn. And then you'll proceed to the north where you'll do a U-turn to go back to the south. This is FDOT's new intersection treatment. I hear a lot of grumblings from the audience, and this is the intersection treatment that they move forward with in their design plans. And like it or not, this is what FDOT's moving forward with. This is their new up-and-coming intersection treatments in many areas around the state. And you can put a lot of traffic through these intersections, and they've deemed this to be the intersection treatment that they want to move forward at this location.
And this is starting this year?
Yes.
Will that be, so that's going to overlap the four-lane improvements that they're doing?
What's that?
That's overlapping the four-lane improvements that they're doing to
That's
state?
part of the four-lane improvements, yeah.
Okay, so this will be done concurrently?
Yeah. So this is actually 3 traffic signals. There'll be 3 signals. There's a signal at each one of these intersections.
Can you indicate that on the map? I'm trying to orient myself.
What's that?
Can you indicate it on the map where the intersection, the signals are going to be? I assume there's one, obviously, at River Road and 31.
So there's a signal there, a signal there, and a signal there.
And that's all approved and happening through FDOT without any county involvement?
Correct.
Okay.
That's all being done by the Babcock Improvement District in conjunction with FDOT. How do I clear that? There you go. It went away. Magic. Thank you. You did a good job. You just stood up and it went away. So, in summary, the analysis indicated that there was no level service issues on North River Road or State Route 31 based on the build-out analysis. FDOT and Babcock Ranch are improving State Route 31 currently down to State Route 78. They're finalizing the PD&E south of 78, and as I indicated, construction funding has now been financed for 2029 south of State Route 78 down to State Route 80. Again, we'll do a more detailed traffic analysis as this project proceeds to development order. If the zoning is approved, then we'll indicate what site-specific improvements are needed at the site access drives on North River Road, turn lane improvements, et cetera, that will be needed at the development order process. And then based on that, it is our opinion that this project is consistent with the LEAP plan, transportation element, and the land development code in terms of the transportation. And that concludes my comments at this time. I'd be more than happy to answer the questions.
The TIS did have one segment that was failing, but I assume these improvements mitigate that?
Yes. When we did our TIS, the funding for 31 south of 78 had not yet been identified programmed. So with that programmed improvement now, we can now take that funding into account, and the widening of those lanes can now be accounted for. So with that improvement, the level service now improves on that State Route 31 segment.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Shane Johnson, Passarella and Associates. I'm a senior ecologist with the firm. I have previously been accepted as an expert in environmental areas, specifically Lee County indigenous vegetation, listed species issues, and wetlands, and respectfully request to be accepted once again this morning.
Yes, thank you.
So before I begin talking about existing environmental conditions, I'd like to walk you through a series of aerials to provide some historical context and the changes that have occurred on the project over time. So there's been talk of Trout Creek. That system is located here in the western side of the project. You can see that pretty clearly on the 1952 aerial. At this time, there was also another named creek system, Otter Creek, which also flows from the north through the property and all the way to the Caloosahatchee River. So both systems are tributaries of the Caloosahatchee. But what you can also see is a connection from Otter Creek. It splits at this point and also connects into Trout Creek right here. So a couple other things to point out. In 1952, portions of the property have been cleared, probably for agriculture at the time. Cattle grazing in the northwest portion of the site, and other patches that you can see here have been cleared. Also, there's a network of trails, which are likely logging trails used to log the property at that time. And also a feature I want to point out is this large marsh located in the northeast portion of the site. So fast forwarding to 1958, the marsh is still there in the northeast. We've got Trout Creek. This segment of Otter Creek, you can see, has been converted into a ditch. The rest of the system looks like it's fully intact and natural. The connection to Trout Creek still exists and converges at this point right here. Also, some other ditches have been installed on the property. You can see from this wetland south to the Otter Creek system. The point of these ditches is to efficiently move water off the landscape, primarily for agriculture, and so they're not wet, so for cattle grazing and other ag operations. So fast forwarding again to 1972, what I didn't point out on the previous aerial is the Caloosahatchee River has more of a natural serpentine shape. But when you get to 1972, you can see it's been channelized heavily. And as part of that process, they've dredged the river, and a lot of the spoil material that was dredged from the river at the time has been deposited, and you can see the signature, this fingerprint, more or less, on the aerial of where it's been deposited in the southern area of the project site and also in the east portion of the project. So that's spoil that's been deposited there from the river. And that marsh is no longer here in the northeast. Otter Creek has been modified even further into essentially a ditch network. So at this point in time, it's no longer functioning naturally as a tributary. It's still conveying water, but not in its natural form as it once did historically. Fast forwarding again to 1999. Here, just want to point out there's been some ponds excavated, primarily for cattle grazing on the site. And that flowway system, that Otter Creek flowway system that connected to Trout Creek is no longer there. Doesn't exist anymore. And the current aerial, 2024. So the point of showing you these historic aerials is to highlight that this property has been disturbed for many decades, is not a pristine piece of property, has been disturbed at multiple levels from a hydrologic standpoint, Otter Creek, cattle grazing, which has really disrupted the wetlands on site and has altered the topography of the wetland areas and has led to spreading exotic vegetation around the site, in addition to clearing native vegetation that has occurred for ag operations and silviculture. So moving on to existing conditions. So we, Passarella and Associates, when we first look at a piece of property, we create a vegetation or land use map, also known as a flux map. And from that flux map, it enables us to extract a lot of information about the property. So a couple pieces of information are shown on this graphic. The wetlands, which total about 70 acres, are shown in green. Those are primarily pasture-type wetlands, like low depressional areas in the pasture, again, heavily disturbed by the cattle operations that currently exist throughout the site. Cattle have full reign and full access to all the areas on the property currently. Also, you see in blue are surface waters. Again, that's Trout Creek here on the west side of the property. And you've got some excavated ponds and what is left of Otter Creek, which is just fragments of ditch at this point. So what we're also able to extract is where the indigenous vegetation areas are versus the non-indigenous. And so looking at the non-indigenous areas, that represents 91% of the project site. And going back to my discussion on the disturbance of the project, that makes sense. The clearing that has occurred, the cattle grazing, the deposition of dredge material from the river, alterations to the hydrology, that has led to this property being 91% non-indigenous. So when we talk about indigenous, per the Land Development Code, that is vegetated areas that contain 75% or less exotic vegetation. So of the non-indigenous areas, most of those are pasture lands. As I mentioned, the site is currently used for cattle grazing, also exotic vegetation, and the surface waters in blue. So the remaining balance of the property is indigenous at 9%. So although representing a small percentage of the property, the indigenous areas, which are more or less scattered pockets throughout the site, are pretty diverse. As you can see here in this list, palmetto prairie, pine forest, live oak, cabbage palm, which live oak and cabbage palm are considered rare and unique habitat types per the lead plan. Hardwood conifer forest, which is a pine oak mix. Cypress, mixed wetland forest, wetland shrub, and freshwater marsh. So moving on to listed species. This is a very similar graphic to the last slide, except it has the listed species locations, the color dots. Those are, each color dot represents a particular species that was located on the property. So Passarella and Associates conducted a Lee County Protected Species Survey on the site in April, May, and October 2022, in accordance with county standards. So during that survey, there were a number of listed species observed. I'm not expecting you to be able to read the legend there. That's just to illustrate that each color dot represents an individual listed species. So there's an American alligator, gopher tortoise burrows, which those are the most numerous on the property in blue. Everglades snailkite, crested caracara, Florida sandhill crane, bald eagle, and 4 different wading bird species observed during our protected species survey. Also, a few listed plant species, royal palm, golden leather fern, giant wild pine, and Florida butterfly orchid were observed. These are not Lee County protected species, but they are protected by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Management plans. So we, Passarella and Associates, prepared 2 management plans that are very detailed and are attached to the staff report. Plans were prepared as part of the zoning application, and these are typically provided at the time of development order, but since the applicant is proposing the density increase, staff needed to understand the mechanism on how that was going to be achieved, hence the management plans at this level. So again, very detailed plans. These are both attached to the staff report. So with respect to indigenous vegetation management, that plan includes methods for exotic removal, intense supplemental planting plans, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in the next slide. Establishment and protection of rare and unique upland habitat. And really the driving policy there in the LEED plan is 123.2.17, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in a minute. Also, flowway protection. We talked about Trout Creek. Alexis talked about how we're preserving Trout Creek as part of the overall conservation area. Preservation, maintenance, and monitoring. Performance standards and success criteria. This is really important because this ties into the policy. Certain success criteria have to be achieved in order to get sign-off for the bonus density that is proposed. Long-term site protection in the form of conservation easement and wetland protection. The majority of the wetlands that I showed on the previous slides will be preserved and incorporated as part of the overall conservation area for the project. Now, protected species management. This is a separate management plan. Again, it addresses all the listed species that were observed during our protected species survey on the property. And this provides specific management measures for the gopher tortoise, American alligator, sandhill crane, wood stork, and black bear, consistent with the listed policies here on the slide. But not specific to just those species. It addresses all the species that were observed on the property. And so for the gopher tortoise specifically, the intent is to keep them on site. The ultimate decision will lie with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission when we apply for a permit. But given the amount of tortoise burrows we have and the tremendous amount of rare and unique upland habitat we're restoring, we prefer to keep them on site. So the species management plan also includes a human-wildlife coexistence plan that provides educational material for residents to have a better understanding of wildlife that may be utilizing the property or in the area, and also methods for minimizing conflicts between humans and wildlife. So this graphic has a lot of colors on it. I'll break this down. But essentially all the colored areas that you see make up the 420 acres of on-site preserve area. Again, that will be placed under conservation easement to Lee County, preserved and protected in perpetuity. So of that 420 acres, approximately 51 acres of wetlands will be retained, preserved, and enhanced. Those are the green areas shown on this map. 8 acres plus or minus of surface waters, that's again Trout Creek and some of the ponds that were dug for cattle, and some portions of Otter Creek, that remnant portions that remain. And the balance really makes up the bulk of the conservation area, 360 acres of uplands. And that is your yellow and orange areas. The yellow and orange are existing upland areas that will be preserved and enhanced through exotic removal and installation of supplemental plantings. And the other 3 colors, the brown, like the tan, and the 2 brown colors represent the rare and unique uplands. So of that 360 acres of uplands within the conservation area, there's approximately 26 acres of rare and unique upland preserve. Again, that's existing rare and unique that we're preserving and enhancing. 2.68 acres of upland restoration. Again, existing uplands that we are restoring through intense plantings. And so the bulk of that rare and unique is really the creation. And those are the tan areas that you see across the site. So since 91% of the property is not indigenous, there's a heavy load, a heavy restoration component to this project. And that's not only going to restore significant amounts of indigenous habitat, it's going to provide significant wildlife movement areas as well. So I mentioned extensive planting. The planting plans are included in the Indigenous Management Plan attached to the staff report. There are several different planting plan types. There's wetlands, there's uplands, and there's also a specific planting plan for the rare and unique uplands. Since it's kind of its own category, it's going to be evaluated kind of separately as part of the density increase. So also, the bottom bullet point here, compatible soil types. I put that in there because that directly relates to the policy, 123.2.17. Does require that rare and unique, whether it's restoration or creation, have the appropriate soil types. So what that means generally, the lead plan doesn't specify this necessarily, but from an ecological standpoint, if you were creating or restoring an upland type of habitat, you want to make sure it's not ponding water for significant periods of time. So these are soil types that are generally well-drained or moderately well-drained. So as part of the zoning application review, we did provide fairly detailed soils analysis that's in section 7 of our Indigenous Management Plan that evaluates the soil types currently on site, and it demonstrates how we do have the appropriate soil types. And that was further substantiated through the geotechnical report, which provided soil borings within primarily the pasture areas on the site, which indicated that at least the upper 2 to 3 feet of the soil profile contains that sandy or sandy mixed soils that do drain well or moderately well. So just a few points on the environmental and aesthetic benefits of the project. From a vegetated standpoint, again, the rare and unique has its own planting plan. These are plant species and plant material that you don't normally see on an average project site. They're more rare. They could be listed, and they're just unique in form. So it's diversified planting plan and helps increase biodiversity, and that directly relates to objective 123.2 at the bottom of the slide here, which is maintain and enhance the biodiversity of natural plant communities. From a wildlife perspective, it provides cover, provides additional movement area, like I pointed out before, interconnection of habitat, and this relates to, again, the bottom of the slide, objective 123.1, retaining the interconnections and functionality of hydroecological systems that pertains to that objective, and increased food availability. So from an aesthetic standpoint, you really have a heterogeneous mixture of different plant material, again, unique in form and shape and size, and diversity in growth form, leaf shape, textures is aesthetically pleasing.
And both of those management plans that you talked about for the habitat, for the restoration and the management, those are adopted by reference in the zoning conditions. So you'll be held to those metrics and the criteria for the restoration as you're moving forward. But what are the actual on-the-ground provisions that'll be given to be sure that the areas that abut the residential development aren't going to be impacted or touched once the folks are there and living? Will you have signage, or is it going to be fenced in some way?
There's going to be signage. We haven't discussed fencing yet, but there may be a fence component. Once we start getting more into the environmental permitting side of things, that may be a requirement. We haven't crossed that bridge yet, but certainly a signage component.
And then are you held, because you've talked about the restoration, it's a question I have in the conditioning, but what is the component, the enforcement capability that the county has to be sure that that restoration is happening before the density is actually being built on the ground? Is that work that you're going to be beginning before they start going vertical on any of the homes?
Right, it has to be done concurrent with development, and has to be completed within, I believe it's 5 years. So there are timing requirements, and the CC for certain phases is dependent on the success of that particular phase of restoration. So this is just a collage of photographs. The upper left is an oak hammock. These are systems that this is not a photograph from the project site, but this is an example of habitat types that we do have on the project. And these are one of the target habitat, rare and unique systems that we anticipate achieving throughout the site. So primarily oak hammock or cabbage palm hammock mix with possibly some pine flatwoods is what we envision as far as the rare and unique upland habitat on the project site. So the rest of the photos here are just examples of species that provide that aesthetically pleasing look, different leaf textures, unique flower shapes that provide not only wildlife cover, food for wildlife, but are fragrant or aromatic and can be enjoyed by the residents as well. So talking and focusing a little bit here on the policy, again, this is the driving policy for the rare and unique and request for additional density. So the areas that I've highlighted in blue here, I think I'm missing a slide. There's a slide missing, but I'll go over that here. The policy has five parts. So what's not shown on here is parts 1, 2, and 3. There's no environmental pertaining to those. Number 4, I'll just read this out loud. So the indigenous preserve may consist of created or restored wetlands, flowways/creeks, or rare and unique upland habitats. Management and monitoring of the indigenous preserve must be in compliance with the indigenous management plan required by the LDC. Monitoring timelines will be extended as needed to assure success criteria established in the indigenous management plan is achieved for at least 5 consecutive years. That goes to your question about what's the accountability, and staff has that ability to extend monitoring if needed if it's not achieving the required success criteria. So the first part of this is what we already discussed. We are creating and restoring wetlands and providing preservation of the wetland flowway system, Trout Creek, and the rare and unique upland component. So I apologize that slide didn't make it here. So under part 5, again, this policy has 5 parts. So part 5 here, again, the environmental portions of this are highlighted in blue. So with respect to rare and unique upland habitats, they must comply with the minimum dimensions, which they do. You can see, especially when Alexis talked about the magnitude of what we're doing and the buffers, you can see how large these areas are going to be. So part 5B, the soils needed to support the establishment and success of the indigenous rare and unique upland habitats. We talked about that, providing the analysis as part of the zoning review. 5C, approve site-specific ecological restoration plan. The ecological restoration plan must include, at a minimum, a replanting plan, habitat restoration plan, success criteria, and long-term monitoring and maintenance. That's all built into the indigenous management plan that we have prepared and is attached to the staff report. And last but not least, the site protection, which is the conservation easement, must be recorded within 5 years of the development order approval, and that's also baked into our management plan. So before I conclude, I just want to state that from my own personal professional opinion, we really have a tremendous opportunity from an environmental standpoint to approve a project like this, given the magnitude, the disturbance that's occurred, on the property over time. The magnitude of the amount of restoration that's going to occur can't be overstated. It's really significant, and this is a chance for a project to be approved with no taxpayer-funded restoration. This is all privately funded. So from an environmental standpoint, it's really a special project. So in that, it's my professional opinion that the Cary+Duke+Povia RPD has met or exceeded all the applicable standards and demonstrated consistency with the Lee Plan and Land Development Code.
So the protected species that you noted, there were various on here. You mentioned the gopher tortoise specifically, that those are going to be retained on site. How are all the other species going to be addressed during the construction phase when that's happening? I assume that there's
Sure.
a timing component that's part of that.
There is, and a large part of the management plan is pre-construction surveys. So something that I didn't mention because it's not part of the zoning process, we don't just do a protected species survey for the entitlement process, including zoning. So for other environmental permits, we do species-specific surveys for caracara, red cockaded woodpecker, Florida bonneted bat. So we've done and spent a lot of time on this property doing surveys. We have to redo that again prior to construction. So if there's any nesting that is observed by, say, a caracara or a bald eagle, that has to be accounted for prior to construction. And if any modifications to the construction schedule need to be made, that's the point of doing that.
And if species-specific management plans are required, that would be adopted at the time of development order or through other agency permitting that you'll have to do?
Both,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yes. Okay, before we get to the next applicant, we're going to take a brief break to give everyone a moment to stretch their legs. 15 minutes, okay? Okay, we'll do a 15-minute break. I'm sorry. But the good news is you get a little rest before we start. So we'll resume at 10:45. Okay, we're back on the record whenever you're ready to proceed.
Very good. Good morning. My name is Brandon Fry, and I'm the civil engineer for the Cary+Duke+Povia project. To give a brief background about myself, I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Florida and have been working in the area as a civil engineer for a little over a decade. Our team has included my resume. I have been qualified as an expert previously, and I'm requesting that you qualify me as an expert in these proceedings as well.
Yes, thank you.
Very good. So before delving into the specifics of the current plan, I think it's important to discuss how we got here. We went through a number of different iterations, and we met with nearby residents. Around that time, we also added the Povia piece to the project, which is this northeastern piece here, and that allowed us to make a few improvements that coincided with the nearby residents' changes, namely moving the accesses along North River Road to better coincide with existing accesses along the northern side and to be in the linear portions, which we all feel is a safer alternative. It also allowed us to remove the crossing across Trout Creek. There were some concerns of flooding or that we would not be able to maintain those conveyances, and adding the Povia piece allowed us to connect to the east rather than to the pod. On the way. It always happens. I'm so tall. It says not to touch it, though. So that's okay. In addition to that, we removed the access to Duke Highway. Our initial plan had access along there, and there was concern of a permanent access. That came out. There was concern of temporary access, which we don't anticipate either as a component of the project. So here's the plan that we ended up with. We believe that this plan is not only the most efficient, but provides significant setbacks to the boundaries of the project. It was a purposeful move to allow buffering of our project to travelers along North River Road, as well as existing residents such as those along Serenoa Court, kind of central on the north side, and along the southern side of Duke Highway. Water and wastewater service will be provided by Lee County Utilities. I'm sure you're aware there was a comp plan amendment that was approved recently. And surface water management will be handled via a number of lakes and detention areas that will collect that water, treat and attenuate it prior to discharging off-site, and then eventually making its way down to the Caloosahatchee River. Another important note, so Alexis touched on the maintenance easement that I think you had asked a question on, the 10 versus 20. There's a 20-foot strip down here on the southeastern portion, and the reason that that's 20 feet is to allow two-directional movement and to allow them to stage equipment if they should ever, they being Lee County, should ever need to get into the creek. Once they get near the creek, they only need 10 feet to be able to really just travel one direction or the other. I also think it's important to note that Lee County has the right but not the obligation. I don't know if it was 100% clear. We, as the maintenance entity for the development, will be taking care of all that maintenance, but if there's some emergency, some neglect or something found, then Lee County has the ability to come in and correct those deficiencies.
And that will be done through an HOA or a CDD or some type of
That's correct.
oversight authority?
Yep, yep, absolutely. Another important component of the site planning was the existing conveyances. It's been mentioned a number of times that we have some pretty major tributaries and conveyances through the property. So there's Otter Creek, which you can see here on the east in its new state. Trout Creek, which has been largely left natural. And then there's a pretty significant drainage along the southern side of Serenoa. So all of that water on the Serenoa Court community travels south and then west along these blue arrows here to where it meets Trout Creek. So we tried to maintain those flow patterns as well as we could. The only one that we're significantly rerouting is that the Otter Creek ditch, and you can see those revised flow paths here in green. So we have an obligation to maintain all of the flows throughout the project, the ones that come in and leave, to avoid disruption from upstream or downstream residents. And going back to the maintenance, I am of the impression, the opinion rather, that these flowways are pretty well choked with exotics, and as a component of our preservation and our commitment via conservation easement, we'll have to maintain them, remove those exotics not only initially but in perpetuity, which should help, even from what they're seeing today.
Are the green arrows then, that's accepting sheet flow that's coming from the north, or is that from the, so it looks like there's culverts that are running under North River Road. So what are the current conditions like? Right,
so starting from the west, there's a box culvert here that goes under the road, and flow aggregates here on the northern side of the road and then goes under the road and into the creek. On the eastern side, there are two culverts that go under the road, and again, just an aggregation of flow that kind of point discharges onto our site, and then some more minor but still important ones. These arrows are really just sheet flow that collects in that low-lying area, and as I mentioned with Serenoa, the flow goes south, collects in a ditch that was dug, I think somewhere around the 70s or 80s, and then heads west to Trout Creek.
Okay, I'm just trying to orient myself a little bit. And the Babcock property to the north, does their water management system operations essentially marry with what you're proposing? Will the water management district look at that whenever you come in for your permitting? I assume that they're looking at a holistic view of the area.
I'm sure that they will. They'll look at the flows that have always come into the property. So if Babcock maintains their obligation to not disrupt the patterns and location that it gets to us, and then we don't disrupt it, then we've sort of daisy-chained our way into a system that, even in its post-construction condition, is cohesive.
Okay.
One of the obligations that we feel is a public benefit is the 8-foot shared use path that goes along our entire frontage. I think it's important to note that this is about 2 miles of shared use path, so it's not an insignificant addition to the community that we believe provides a safer route for joggers, cyclists, children, and other shared use path users that would otherwise be forced to use the roadway or roadside swale, which probably isn't good. Probably one of the larger public benefits that we see as a component of this project is the centralized water and sewer that's being brought to this area. Currently, north of the river and east of 31, there are only 4 draft fire hydrants, which are just hydrants that pull out of a lake or a well or something, not an enormously reliable source of water for fire suppression. That'll be remedied by us bringing water to our site, and as an aside of us bringing water to that site, we'll have fire hydrants that we've located strategically to coincide with intersections which are, have the highest likelihood of vehicle fires from collisions, and water availability for fire suppression. We've also located one along Duke Highway for fire suppression in that area, and not an insurance expert, but it's my understanding that if you're within 1,000 feet of a hydrant, you're eligible for insurance premium discounts. So, there's sort of that ancillary benefit to folks as well once this water line goes in. I was surprised to find that there was no water in this area at all, so I'm excited about that. It's my professional opinion that the Cary+Duke+Povia RPD has met all of the applicable standards and demonstrated consistency with the Lee Plan and Lee County Land Development Code. I'm able to answer any questions you have now or
If you could just go
afterwards.
back to the graphic with the arrows again, can you just describe generally how the water management system is going to operate? Because again, obviously flooding is a concern in this area. You've got some coastal high areas on site, and you've got wetlands and things that you're going to be working within. So how is the post-construction or even during construction movement of that water going to occur during storm events or during a normal day?
Well, let's handle storm events first. So I think it's important to make a distinction that flooding can be from two real sources. You have the conveyance type flooding, which is when a river gets overwhelmed, and then you have coastal type flooding, which this area of the Caloosahatchee also experiences. There's not much that anyone can do, in my opinion, about coastal flooding, because it's just the ocean coming up. You can't fight that. But there are things that we can do to maintain and improve conveyances throughout the site, and that's why we were as purposeful as we could in avoiding creeks like Trout Creek, which is a pretty major tributary in the area, and there was a lot of detailed analysis that went in place into Otter Creek and rerouting that to ensure that it has, at a minimum, the same capacity that it has today. Internal to the community, we will be held to all the same state, local, federal guidelines with FEMA and South Florida Water Management District to avoid flooding within our community. Does that answer your question?
Well, so you mentioned lakes, so there's a number of lakes that I've highlighted in blue along. So is the idea that you're going to collect within the lakes, and I mean actually pretty technical in terms of where the culvert's going to be, where's the piping going to be, and the outfall structures, how is it going to flow?
Right.
Generally southwest, I believe, is the direction that you're going.
Right. So around our community, picture a berm, and not a giant mound, but a small berm that catches the water that runs off from the lots, from the roads within the community. It's brought into that lake or those lakes for storage, and there are control structures, which some of them are shown here. You can see them, these black squares with little arrows coming out of them. Those are the areas that we have control structures that will limit the discharge to the surrounding area, and that's in an effort to provide water quality, nutrient reduction, and attenuation for those areas prior to it being discharged. Does that answer your question?
Is it sheet flowing right now? The current conditions are just anything that's crossing this property is going downstream to the properties to the south?
The flows that are within, let me go back here. The flows that are going through the property are pretty, they're pretty linear. They're pretty confined to those tributaries that exist. But there's, 700 and some odd acres of open space, and that just sheet flows and, collects in the North River Road ditch or along this southern boundary. It makes its way to the creek. It all sort of eventually makes its way to these larger flow paths that are there.
Okay, but the water management permit district that you're going to have to get is going to ensure that you're not putting anyone off-site in a worse position than they are right now
That's
after the
correct.
project. I'm trying to get to that question.
Yep.
Okay. So
Yes.
the current conditions, in your opinion, are less desirable, maybe, than what it would be
That's correct.
post-construction?
Yes.
And that's because you have these operations on site, and there's wet and dry detention areas, I'm assuming also?
So we believe that the surface water management will be in a better condition post-development than in the pre-development condition because of the on-site constraints that we have, like the lakes and control structures, but outside of our development pods as well, because of For instance, the rerouting of Otter Creek allowed us to enlarge and provide some overbank areas which increase capacity in that portion of Otter Creek. We believe that clearing out exotics, makes it a little easier for water to make its way through. So,
Okay, so will
yes.
folks that are off-site, for the off-site impacts, will they notice any difference because of all the restoration work and things that are happening on the site and the rerouting that you're talking about, or the maintenance? You mentioned that there were some constrained flowways, you thought maybe, and you're going to be responsible, I believe was your testimony, of that portion of Trout Creek that's on your property through the CDD. So will that improve or impede flow for folks
I think
off-site?
it will improve it, yes. To what extent will it be noticeable? I don't know. Other than the coastal flooding that we unfortunately saw, I'm not sure how significantly this area floods. And, a lot of the lands to the north that we receive flow from are conservation lands or lands that are sort of in a virgin and untouched state. So upstream of us, will it get better by calculation? Yes. Will it get better by walking down the street, being able to recognize that? I don't know.
Okay.
And downstream of us, I don't anticipate any impacts. We're pretty close to the Caloosahatchee, and then we're probably more controlled by the tides than we are by anything that we could or could not do.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Is that all?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? I'm shorter than he is. So I'm Kirk Martin, president of Water Science Associates. Been 40 years practicing water supply, water resource management, and wastewater management in Lee County. I have been accepted in this forum and others as an expert witness in hydraulics, hydrology, water resources, and request the same here.
Yes, thank you.
My presentation is relatively short, primarily focused on various issues that were raised in public meetings that were held with the neighborhoods, and go forward with that. However, the first slide I'll show may have something to do with your last question, Madam Hearing Examiner, that may be helpful. So my understanding of and I didn't do the surface water management design, but I am addressing what we put together as a water quality management plan. But in addition to the normal lake storage, so to your question earlier, there is more storage in the property to hold water because of the lake system. But the lake systems are designed to meet state and federal standards for water retention, flood management, and water quality. But in addition to that, what I think is really cool about this project and relates to what Shane talked about is instead of discharges out of the lakes into waters of the state, we go into the preserve area. So there's actually a tertiary level of treatment beyond just the lake system, and you get a highly diffuse flow into natural water bodies. So it's really, I think, an extra level of treatment and water quality storage on this site. But with regard to that, we also developed a water quality management plan, and that includes 7 surface water management or surface water stations where we sample for water quality. That water quality sample will be done pre-development as a background, and biannually after that. The parameters to be measured will be nutrients, salinity, metals, pesticides, dissolved oxygen, and sundry other things. But that'll be done biannually at 7 surface water sites, including the 5 outfalls that go into the preserve areas. In addition to that, we'll have 2 shallow monitor wells just for general groundwater conditions, be tested for water levels. Also 1 sandstone aquifer, that's the primary source of water for most people in the area for drinking. We'll have a monitor well into that. And so there'll be this biannual water level and water quality assessment over the project. The next 2 slides are a little bit busy, but it was kind of a primary issue raised with regard to utilities on site. I want to talk about septic tanks versus central sewer systems. I don't want to disparage septic tanks because they have their place. They work very well in certain locations, but not everywhere. And so essentially septic systems do not promote public health and safety and welfare or good water at this particular site. Septic tanks do not work well with high water table, which is North Lee County is known for. Septic tanks do not work well when they're proximate to natural surface water bodies, Caloosahatchee, Trout Creek, Owl Creek. Septic tanks do not work well in fine soils, which are also typical of North Lee County. But more importantly, I'd like to suggest that septic tanks eliminate the potential benefits of the proposed cluster development. That includes the increased buffering and the increased preserve area, the increased wildlife habitat, the improved floodplain management, the increased stormwater storage I just talked about, and improved stormwater treatment. If we went to septic tanks, you can't have the cluster development. You've got to spread everybody out, and you lose all these attributes that I think are a great improvement of the project. In contrast, a central sewer system does promote the public health and safety. Central sewers significantly reduce nutrient loading to the environment. They provide a valuable resource in terms of reclaimed water for Lee County utilities. They can sell that water and apply it, where it's needed. And they do allow for the cluster development and its attendant benefits of buffering, preserve, wildlife habitat, floodplain management, and stormwater treatment. And just an example of that, the table I'm showing you here is showing the standard loading for a septic tank versus an advanced water treatment system that Lee County would provide, both in terms of biological oxygen demand, total suspended solids, nitrogen and phosphorus. And you can see in the right-hand column, basically it's a 50 to 95% reduction, including an 89% reduction in nitrogen from an advanced wastewater treatment system we're proposing, as opposed to septic tanks. And finally, this item came up kind of late in one of the latter meetings held with the public, was concerned about water use on the property. And the fact that we're providing central potable water as provided by Lee County Utilities will be reducing overall potential water use on the site, because we're taking that entire potable use off-site, putting it somewhere else. So I'm going to suggest somewhere in the 50% range of potential water use on this property is being eliminated by the removal of potable supply from the site. In addition to that, we're proposing a centralized control of the irrigation system. Again, with the smaller clustered home sites, we'll be reducing overall potential irrigation on the site. And for example, our water use permit, which is already in process with the Water Management District, the only thing it's waiting on is, I think, is Brandon's surface water management stuff, but it's almost done. But when we look at that, we're only irrigating about 12% of the entire site. So in looking at that, even our irrigation use is probably an 85% reduction over what could happen in an agricultural property, or probably something like 70% reduction over what would happen if you had all 1 acre ranchette type development. So overall, potable use is going away, irrigation use is being significantly reduced, and also highly controlled, so we don't have people willy-nilly just turning on their sprinklers when they want to.
Irrigation water, if I recall, is not being provided by, irrigation waters are not being provided through centralized systems, so I believe you're going to be using on-site?
It's a centralized system, but it's controlled by the development. So instead of everybody having their own wells and turning on their system, it'll be a centralized irrigation system that'll include, I think it's 2 primary supply wells going into a lake, and then that's being repumped into the distribution system for the houses.
From within your property, though? The irrigation water is entirely self-contained, was my understanding?
That is correct.
Okay.
And then with that, just a conclusion, in my professional opinion, this property will meet all the applicable standards demonstrated in the Lee County Plan Development Code.
If you can go back for 1 second to the water quality slide that you
Yes,
had
ma'am.
that shows, I assume that what you're doing is you're going to be testing the off-site waters before they enter your property and then testing them as they're leaving? Are those where the monitoring wells are going to be?
So right now the plan is, I don't know that we've got anything coming on the property. That's actually a really good idea, honestly. Right now, in order to meet Lee County, the concerns of Lee County Natural Resources, we're doing a pre-development sampling of all the potential outfall stations, the original 5 I talked about. But once development occurs, we'll be testing all those 5 sites plus 2 lakes, plus 2 shallow wells, plus 1 deeper well. But actually, I think your thought about what's coming onto the site is a really good idea. I may think about that.
And the pre-water sampling is happening now? Or is that
It'll happen before the construction starts. It hasn't happened yet.
Okay, before you can, again, go vertical on anything. You've got to get that. Okay.
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Again, Alexis Crespo, representing the applicant. I'm going to go slightly out of order from the book we gave you. I'm going to run through our 48-hour letter and then close on this. So I'm going to flip to slide 90. And thank you and everyone for their patience as we go through our presentation. I'm hopeful that we put some good information on the record that helped ease some concerns. So I'll just run through again the items in our 48-hour letter. As you noted, we do have staff recommendation of approval with conditions. I believe we may be in total agreement with the items I'm going to run through here. Staff has not had a chance to look at the first item, but others we were able to work through last week, so we'll certainly hear from them during their presentation, but I believe we are close here. So the first condition I'll take up is 3B. This condition states, prior to development order approval for individual lots within the development, any lot within 300 feet of the development perimeter must be a minimum of 15,000 square feet. So the intent here is to achieve compatibility and protect rural character by locating larger lots along the perimeter. And this, as stated in the staff report, correlates to the North Olga Policy 2922, which I'll read aloud as well, which that policy guides development in North Olga by stating proposed residential development adjacent to an existing large lot area or commercial agriculture business will provide appropriate separation, such as minimum lot size of 1 unit per acre for lots abutting the perimeter of the property lines. For the purpose of this policy, large lot residential uses are defined as those residential uses with lot sizes equal to or greater than 1 acre, which certainly exist generally around the subject property. We are proposing an alternative solution to achieving enhanced compatibility. We believe that the extensive setbacks, restoration areas along our perimeter fully achieve all of the goals, objectives, and policies about protection of rural character outlined throughout the Lee plan. But just to start, we wanted to put on the record that while the Lee plan provides no guidance, the Land Development Code does state that abutting the property would mean, in this case, those lots means properties having a boundary line or point or portion thereof in common with no intervening street right-of-way or easement or any other easement over 25 feet in width. So this would be where you have proposed lots directly on a lot line shared with another large lot estate, which we would submit does not exist in our project. We have our residential tracts, which again are separated at minimum 60 feet from the property line, and the only area where we're less than the 300 feet from large lots over an acre is along that southern stretch with Duke Highway. So let me explain that a little bit better. That condition applies to 300 feet, and when you look in these areas near Serenoa Court, where certainly there are existing large lots, residential development, these are 400 plus feet away. So we wouldn't trigger the condition anywhere along these property lines. As I'm circling here, these are vacant lands. I noted this, there's no residential use on this property. This property is owned by the Cary family, so really it would only be triggered along this Duke Highway line. However, we submit that we do not have lots abutting that property line. We have a conservation easement tract that's a minimum of 170 feet, which will be separating these lots from the Duke Highway right-of-way. And then furthermore, in addition to our conditions proposed with that preservation, we do have a public roadway intervening between us and any lots. There are no lots on the north side of Duke Highway abutting this property. So we would submit that as proposed with our conservation easement tract, we are not triggering the need for additional conditioning beyond what we have provided for to meet the intent of that policy.
Is there any, go back for a second, is there any consideration, because right now I think you're at 4,000 square feet for your single family lots and 3,000 square feet for your 2-family attached, and it's all just R on the master concept plan. Has there been any thought given to where the 2-family attached are going to be? Are those also capable of being along the exterior, which also I would think to address staff's concern and the one that you just stated, which is that visual experience that off-site folks are having and just the feel of having cluster development that close to them when they're not used to having anything right across the street. I don't know if that's something that had been discussed or where the lot sizes or the 15,000 square foot either came from, and that's something staff can talk about when we get to the staff presentation. But there was a lot of talk in the staff report about being consistent with Owl Creek, but their minimum lot size, I think, is 6,500 for single family and 3,750, so they're slightly larger. So
Right.
again, I just don't know if there's any thought that went into that or any capability to isolate where the two-family attached are going to be, if that is a concern that staff has. And it may be not their concern. I'd like to hear from them before we get into depth on that. But it's a question that I had for you of whether
Yes.
that's discussed in any detail or if it's just capable of going anywhere on the site at this point.
As conditioned, it's capable of going anywhere on the site. I think we're going to have ample time to discuss throughout the hearing and can certainly readdress that in either in rebuttal if there's some limitations we can place on that dwelling type to further achieve compatibility. The North Olga plan policies that guide development in North Olga, and these have been implemented in the comp plan since around 2010, 2011. It really encourages the clustered development approach. It does ask for the large lots where they are directly on the perimeter, but in general, the policies cited here are directing for smaller lots, multiple housing types, but clustering them so that you have expansive preserve and open space located around the perimeter of the property as well as over environmentally sensitive areas. So we would submit the guiding objectives and policies support our proposal. They also allow for the rare and unique to be integrated into the project, thereby ensuring the compact nature of the community. This issue has come up. Obviously, there's been a lot of growth in Lee County and in some of those areas that interface between the rural and urban areas. So we did examine other recent PD approvals that have come through the hearing examiner's office to see how this was addressed. And we would submit our proposal for the 170-foot setback is the mechanism to address compatibility here. Other projects have agreed to larger lots on the perimeter, but the setbacks are nominal compared to what we're proposing. So we have Buckingham 345 here. That is a proposed project adjacent to the rural community preserve in the Buckingham area, of course. And they have delineated these R3 and R2 tracks along perimeters with larger lot sizes. And we have the ordinance or resolution number referenced there as well. So they did larger lots, but they have a 30-foot setback. We have 170 feet of not only setback, but created restoration preserve and, as we will show you, a newly proposed enhanced buffer. Owl Creek, you've well noted that the lot sizes are slightly larger, so we will come back and address that piece of it. But this also was approved recently. It used the same rural rare and unique density bonus and does not require any larger lot sizes, and the setback is 50 feet from the property line and 20 from North River Road. So again, we're hundreds of feet beyond what was allowed in that case. And then Bayshore Ranch also, you'll note 2022, they agreed to a larger lot treatment along perimeters. That's 12,750 square foot lots. And those tracks are 75 feet from property lines. They also utilize the same mechanism. So ours well above and beyond any of these other examples in lieu of the larger lot sizes. And then lastly, the Babcock Ranch MPD is in the same community, approved in 2022. And there's no requirement for larger lots, and there is a treatment where the setback is 100 feet from at the smallest location. So we would submit based on these other recent approvals. We are exceeding that separation, the preserve treatment, to land on a compatible, visually rural aesthetic from our perimeters where we are interfacing, not abutting, but interfacing with larger lot areas that certainly exist in this area. So again, this will all be conservation easement per policy 123217 of the Lee plan. So this is not just HOA maintain, preserve that sometimes trees go missing in. This is a dedicated conservation easement to a third party that's going to be ranging, and I think this aerial helps you see that the roadway is what we abut, with the exception of this property here that's undeveloped. And so there's separation here, and as well as an intervening roadway. And this again is the pinch point where we're the closest at 170 feet. And then we have the 60-foot setback and the location adjacent to the southwest. I'm gonna hand it to Will to walk through all this has laid groundwork of, we believe we're fully consistent with the North Olga policies, Northeast Lee County policies guiding protection of rural character. We've obviously sensibly designed the site to achieve that. However, we heard staff that they needed a bit more, whether that's larger lots. Our approach is to enhance screening in this area so that there will be a very opaque wall of native vegetation, and so Will's gonna walk you through that as a registered landscape architect.
Will Hellman on the record again. So the two images that you see, the image on the left is Duke Highway looking to the northwest, demonstrating existing vegetation, which includes mature bald cypress in this particular image, as well as the exotic invasive Brazilian pepper. Similarly, the image on the right is also on Duke Highway looking to the northeast towards the property, shows existing mature pine trees, as well as additional Brazilian pepper exotic invasives. So understanding that condition of development is the removal of exotic invasives, we understand and appreciate that there is the potential for there to be some gaps in the visual separation at that time of removal. So what we've visited the site and surveyed, and there are a large number of existing mature live oaks, South Florida slash pines, and cabbage palms of varying height, as well as lesser qualities of bald cypress and some additional native mid-story trees. This image up here, created image, depicts what we think it would look like as a typical condition after the removal of exotic invasives. So you can see it's a little bit thinner than what it would look like after that 5-year grow-in. But notably, the line of sight is still obstructed by the proposed plant material and existing plant material. This graphic represents approximately 5-year grow-in period, which is consistent with the Indigenous Restoration Plan. The smaller trees that you see here range in height from about 6 to 10 feet, which would be the anticipated height after 5 years of growth from their initial installed height at 5 feet. To ensure that there is 100% opacity along the frontage of Duke Highway, this additional condition that we have offered includes the installation of 10-foot height native canopy trees, as well as 5-foot minimum height cabbage palms along the first 25 feet in from the property boundary, infilling any gaps in the existing vegetation after the removal of exotic invasives. Again, we feel that the 10-foot height native canopy trees are consistent with the code minimum landscape requirements with the LDC, and the 5-foot height cabbage palms are shorter than what the LDC requires, but we feel like there's more instant impact because of the growth habits of the cabbage palms. They would be installed in minimum clusters of 3 at varying heights to maximize and create that opacity along Duke Highway. The revised condition reads, an enhanced native buffer shall be provided adjacent to Duke Highway with a minimum width of 25 feet and within the 170-foot minimum setback. The enhanced buffer shall include the following minimum plantings: 10-foot tall, 2-inch caliper native canopy trees, and 5-foot clear trunk cabbage palms planted no more than 15 feet on center and within 25 feet of the property boundary where necessary to fill in visual gaps between existing native vegetation in order to form a continuous 100% opaque vegetative screen within 5 years of growth. The native canopy tree species will be consistent with and in addition to the approved Cary+Duke+Povia RPD Indigenous Preserve Management and Restoration Plan supplemental plantings list dated May 2024 within this buffer. Cabbage palms will be planted in minimum groups of 3, and the enhanced buffer will be installed prior to issuance of building permits for homes within 300 feet of the Duke Highway right-of-way. Any questions?
Had that been shown to staff prior to now or no? Okay, so we'll address their comments to it later. Thank you. That's all I need for now.
All right, so thank you, Will.
Yes.
Yes. Oh.
Ms. Cresswell, under policy 29.2.2, in your expert opinion, with the proposed condition and the separation, does it provide what the policy talks about as quote appropriate separation?
Yes, based upon not only the spatial separation of 170 feet, the restoration plantings that will go in that location under conservation easement, we did note staff's concern that with removal of exotics, separation and preserve may not be enough to block the views. I believe we are even more consistent with 29.2.2 with these supplemental plantings and the very specific language regarding opacity of the plantings, the timing of them so they're not going in concurrent with the homes. I think in some, yes, this is consistent with 29.2.2.
And when I read that policy, it says provide appropriate separation, and it says such as, and it gives the example of large lots. So such as is defined as, for example. So given the fact that that's not a requirement, but a for example, does that further bolster your expert opinion that this policy is addressed by the proposed plan?
Yes, and I would submit that in lieu of the separation enhanced buffers, the condition would be 15,000 square foot lots potentially abutting Duke Highway with minimal 15 feet right-of-way buffers. I would submit that's much less compatible, that lot size is still smaller than what's immediately abutting the roadway. So the solution to completely screen views of these homes and place them in a location where they're not visible from Duke Highway or these folks' property is much more in line with the intent of 29.2.2 as opposed to introducing 15,000 square foot little over quarter acre lots into this area where they would be much more visible compared to the proposed scenario.
Thank you.
Thank you. But all that being said, you have a wonderful staff, and these conditions get worked out over time, and we do very much respect the intent of the condition that we needed to go further with our proposal to achieve the intent of the condition if we are relying on separation as our metric or solution to the rural character protection. So we hope over the course of this we can work on that condition and be in agreement with them. The next conditions I'll hit on briefly. I believe we're again in agreement with them on. So with the level of service safety, we did get a lot of public feedback about concerns about EMS. I noted that Babcock is dedicating land for that within less than 2 miles of the site, so there are imminent solutions to this. We just were requesting a slight rewording to tie the requirement to an availability letter of service, because that's really the standard of demonstrating sufficient level of service. And level of service in your comp plan is non-regulatory for EMS services, so this is a way that Lee County Development Services staff can check that, yes, we've got a letter from Ben Abe's saying there's availability and still meet the intent of this.
again, I'll address that question to staff.
Sure. Condition 16 is a trip generation cap condition. We met with staff. Trips are capped by your worst case scenario dwelling type and the maximum number of units you can build of those highest generating homes, which in this case is single family detached, which is how we ran our traffic study. So this just is another complex monitoring item for staff, and we discussed with them and they agreed they could eliminate this condition entirely, as the limit on units will meet the intent here of limiting trips and density. And that concludes our discussion on conditions. So I will just do a run through of lead plan and LDC compliance. Again, we appreciate.
Will you be getting into, that was the 48-hour letter conditions. Are there other discussions on conditions, or did you have any additional testimony on conditions? I had a question on conditions.
I do not.
Okay. My question is, excuse me, I need to ask a question first. So the density derived from rare and unique habitat condition that was in the Oak Creek essentially bound the platting of the additional density lots that they were getting to the restoration work that was required from the rare and unique uplands. I didn't see that carried in the proposed conditions in this case, but the one that you just provided did tie the buffering that you couldn't have any of the building permits, I assume, along that Duke Highway corridor until you got the additional buffering in place for that portion. Mm-hmm. Is there an intention to tie that somehow to the conditions? Because I did not see that, and that's a question I can ask staff as well. But it was something that was specifically called out when this was utilized in the adjoining property in Oak Creek, and I didn't see it here. Because the concern, of course, is you go in for your building permits before the 5 years is up that you have to do the restoration work that you need. So I'm not sure how those two things coincide.
The timing of it, we can address that. I would like to ask another person of the team to address it. Should I?
It doesn't have to be now.
No,
it's just
okay.
if you were doing additional testimony on conditions, that was a question that I had. I wanted to get addressed, but it doesn't need to be at this moment.
Okay. I'll make a note of that. Oh, to follow up with an earlier question you asked in terms of the separation of the pods, the separation or the access is the only separating measure. Folks that live in the western pod will be able to use the amenities. They won't be separately branded or separate communities. It'll be the same neighborhood, just with different access points.
Okay. And I noted they're all three gated, but I assume then that means everyone within the development has gated access, rights of entry to all three entrance points?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that was
Thank
confirmed.
you.
Thanks. All right, so to summarize, we are in agreement with staff that the proposed RPD is entirely consistent with your Rural Future Land Use Category Policy 141. We are within the density limits, as this policy specifically references the policy under Goal 123 related to rare and unique habitat, and we meet all the criteria under that policy as well, which we'll touch on. And this meets the intent of the rural category to limit to lower density residential uses. Our density is 1.39 units per acre, and also protect wide and vast areas of open space and preserve to uphold the natural resources and just overall view sheds within the community. We're also consistent with the wetland future land use category in terms of preservation of the majority of on-site uplands, and our density calculation does take into account any areas of impacts outlined under 151. Development timing and consistency, we walked you through the development in this area that's occurred largely due to Babcock Ranch and influx of population growth into this area of Lee County. The area has held on to rural future land uses and low density future land uses to uphold the character, but there has been these rural subdivisions approved over time. So we are the fourth of PDs in this area. We also showed you that the remaining area is spoken for either developed with large lot residential or largely under a permanent conservation easement as part of state-owned preserves. So this is really one of the last pieces available in the area for this rural planned development subdivision. Because of this growth, there is water and sewer being extended to This area, as by way of Owl Creek, this property was also added into the service area to allow for those services, so a demonstration that the location and timing is appropriate. FDOT is expanding State Road 31, is starting those improvements this year. There's fire and EMS planned within 2 miles of the site, and another piece of this policy is the protection of the surrounding community in terms of the proposed development, which we achieve through the preserves, the setbacks, the limitation on building heights, et cetera. Touched on water and sewer service under standard 4.11 and 4.12. Again, we have been added to future service area maps 4A and B, indicative of our compliance with this policy, and the developer will pay all costs associated with extending utilities to this property. We also have achieved or obtained letters of availability from LCU demonstrating capacity and intent to serve the project. Policy, or Goal 5, is the residential land use policy relating to compatibility, which again has been spoken at length today. 5.12 and 5.1.5 really relate to protection of established residential communities when new development is proposed. So to summarize, we have proposed enhanced buffers as well as external preserve areas along all roadways, limited access to any road except North River Road. This is located in an area with public infrastructure either available or being extended at current time, and we have demonstrated availability of services in compliance with this policy. Policy 17.3233, and then another one in the Northeast Lee County goal requires community meetings. We have met many times with the community. We've gone to Alva Inc., we've gone to the North Olga Community Planning Panel. We just regularly attend those to give updates and answer questions. We've also had to have meetings within North Olga, which has no public meeting space, so we've met on the property at the Cracker Shack, so we've far exceeded these requirements and had good turnouts at these meetings, unlike some community meetings. We're moving into the Northeast Lee County and North Olga community plan policies. I worked at the firm that adopted these into the Lee plan back in 2010, 2011, and worked with the community and stakeholders on development of these policies. So I do have firsthand knowledge of their intent and inclusion in the Lee plan. So these policies, again, speak to protection of rural character and in line with that, natural resource protection through compact and cluster development. We believe this is, our proposal is much more consistent with this policy than allowing 788 1-acre lots on well and septic in terms of the natural resource protection, in terms of the substantial habitat we're creating, as Shane spoke to very well. We have preserved a historic area on the site, and we've noted our 60% open space. Policies also under Northeast Lee County, 2741, supporting the scenic character and quality along roadways. So again, with our enhanced buffering along North River Road, no access points, and permanent conservation on all abutting roadways, we fully meet the intent of that policy. Under 2742, we are incorporating the required 8-foot wide multi-use path along North River Road, which is consistent with that specific policy. Wildlife connections, also under 2743. There is no impacts to that Trout Creek corridor, and based on our preserve design, we have significant connected areas that adjoin off-site preserves to fully address this policy in terms of habitat creation and corridor preservation. Policies now getting into Goal 29, which is the specific for North Olga. These policies allow for flexibility of lot size. They want to encourage different housing types, diversity, but coupled with balancing open space preservation, natural resource preservation. They specifically call out being able to cluster to achieve these goals, and we've addressed 29.2.2 where it is our testimony that the substantial setbacks supplemented by restoration enhanced buffers will fully meet the intent of 29.2.2 to preserve the rural character for folks that live on the south side of Duke Highway. Getting into just some supplementary policies, 5318, 5319 relates to paying our fair share to, or really the whole cost of extending water and sewer service to this area, paying all connection fees, et cetera. So that will not be on the taxpayers of Lee County, and they will also have the benefit of the fire hydrant infrastructure associated with this improvement. You've heard at length about our surface water management design, as well as protection of groundwater through the proposed design of our lake systems, through centralized utilities that are going to go a long way in enhancing the environmental quality of the project. And as Kirk noted, we will not be using potable water for irrigation in line with 6116. 6121 is also an infrastructure-related policy outlined in our materials, and I believe the staff report as well. I've already noted the extension of water and sewer services. Our impact fee amount for the number of units based on current adopted fees is $10.3 million, and we will pay $5.6 million in connection fees to LCU, just as demonstration of covering the costs of the project. 9513 and 9533, again, is another related policy regarding having availability and covering the costs of the project and not having this fall on the taxpayers of Lee County, which is provided for in the zoning and conditions. And I've noted the fire hydrant public benefit around the project. I know I'm going along here. We just want our record to be intact, but I'm very close. So policies under goal 123. So that is the rare and unique goal that allows us to ask for the 0.39 additional units per acre within the project. So there's, you noted, 5 different criteria with some sub-criteria. The first one is it has to be greater than 10 acres in size. We far exceed that amount. Direct access to an arterial road is the second criteria. We have 3 points of access to an arterial road. You have to connect to centralized water and sewer, which clearly is provided for in the RPD. You have to provide 60% open space. Of that, 50% of the site has to be preserved under permanent conservation easement. And then you mentions very specific details regarding that preserve. We meet or exceed in all cases the minimum dimensions for open space outlined in Chapter 10. Shane has discussed the suitable soils for the restoration plantings to ensure that they survive and thrive on the property. 5C notes that where you have exotics or impacted areas of the site, you've got to first mitigate before you restore, and then monitor to make sure the exotics don't return, which we've addressed will occur through our different management plans. And then 5D is ensuring that all of this stays intact in perpetuity by requiring the conservation easement within a set period of time to an acceptable third party. So it's not just the developer in Lee County, it is with other parties to make that very difficult to ever change. This is a demonstration of our consistency with policy 123217 in terms of this is 328 acres of uplands being preserved and restored, which we've discussed has a lot of environmental benefit in the area. It's not just your typical wetland preservation, but really creating diverse habitat on the site that does not exist today. Protection of wetlands through our proposed design, mitigating any impacts, particularly the wetlands along Trout Creek, through our design to connect to centralized water and sewer. And also our water quality monitoring built into the conditions. We are consistent with policy 12512. I will rely on the criteria outlined in your staff report as well as our application materials that we do meet 34145. We meet or exceed all performance standards. We've enumerated those throughout the presentation. This is fully compliant with your rural and wetlands future land use categories and the supplementary goal 123 that allows for the nominal density bonus through restoration. We've demonstrated and have staff recommendation of approval for all of our deviations, showing that they are largely to mitigate and prevent any impacts to environmentally sensitive areas on the site. Again, very important compatibility with existing and planned uses in the area, achieved through expansive setbacks and other limitations on density, access, et cetera. The site does have sufficient access. We have 3 points of ingress egress, and the western pod does have support for the one access point from all of the required agencies. The F is actually traffic compatibility with existing and planned uses in the area, and that's largely met through, again, limiting access to just the arterial roadway and not allowing any traffic onto North Olga Drive or Duke Highway. And Ted has walked you through the improvements in the area to facilitate additional traffic from the project. G, this project not only doesn't adversely impact environmentally critical or sensitive areas, it creates and enhances environmentally critical and sensitive areas and natural resources on the site through not only the habitat management plan, the water and sewer connections, and the restoration. The site will be served by urban services as evidenced by our letters of availability, with the exception of transit, which is not available. And we have a slight modification to the EMS condition to ensure that's available. The proposed mix of uses is appropriate at the site. The density is compliant with the Lee plan. The dwelling types are those approved in other PDs in the immediate vicinity abutting this property. And the compact clustered form of the project does comply with the North Olga policies and the intent of the North Olga community plan to preserve the natural resources of the community and limit the development footprint. J is safeguards and conditions to protect the public interest. We believe we're largely in agreement with staff and believe that the supplemented condition in lieu of their condition 3 will meet the intent of that condition to safeguard public interest in view sheds from Duke Highway. And then lastly, I've touched on the supplementary deviation criteria. We have 5 deviations recommended for approval. And with that, I think now I can skip to my very last slide, but I don't think I need it. We'll close with, in my professional opinion, the proposed RPD is entirely consistent, exceeds the requirements of the Lee Plan and Land Development Code.
I asked my questions as we went along, and I know we'll discuss those more after we hear from everyone. The last question I had, I did not ask yet, was whether any attention has been given to construction traffic for the project, and I ask because I did my site visit, and the second entrance point, the best I can tell, is somewhat close to the curve that's made at that location. So I didn't know if there's any availability to limit construction traffic to the westernmost access point of that pod. I know that you can't do it all the way on the original pod, but if there would be some way just to try to keep it for safety concerns off of the curve as much as possible.
Hi. Brandon Fry, for the record. So your question was limiting construction traffic to the western entry of that larger easternmost pod, right?
Correct.
That's it. I think that both entries are in a tangential portion of the curve. It's not like it's mid-curve. I don't know what that distance is, but I've got to imagine there's probably 500 feet or so between the end of that curve and that entry, that eastern entry location along North River Road. So no, we haven't thought about it to a great extent. The Florida Department of Transportation has pretty detailed guidelines for maintenance of traffic and what we would need to maintain during that construction period. And any required turn lanes would be, also installed prior to or concurrent with that first phase of construction. So we hadn't put an enormous amount of thought into that just because of all of those mitigating factors that exist to help counteract, any unsafe condition that I think you're concerned with. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes.
Neil, can I find it, talk? Pat Neil would like to.
Madam
address-
Hearing Examiner, of course, your job is to maintain the Lee plan, but I have a job too, which is to make sure we sell homes. If we believe that prior to we believe in what we call the 30-second look. If a person's going to buy a home, they arrive at the site and make their decisions whether they like it there within the first 30 seconds. And we, of course, have held the property way back, so this will be, might say, indistinguishable from the new critical habitat once done. If you choose to condition the trouble with the construction road is it's invasive, dusty, ugly. We think the better place for it would be through the curve that would be on the east side of the curve, past the construction entrance, and so that we could get to the back of the site for construction, rather than putting the construction through the front of the property. That's also the highest place. We call it Mount Povia. It's 43 feet high. It's easy to maintain a construction road there, and we wouldn't have to have quite as much, I'll say, destruction of the environment in order to do so. So if you condition a construction road, we'd prefer it be on the extreme east side of the property, past the tangent of the curve.
Okay.
Does that help you at all?
It answers the question. Thank you. Did that conclude applicant's presentation?
Yes. Neil, do you want to close up anything? We would, of course, like opportunity for rebuttal.
Yes.
We'll have to figure it out. Great. Yes, we're
You're completed?
we're-
Okay.
Yes.
Are you doing okay on the break? Okay. How long does staff think that you'll need for your presentation?
Depending on discussion, maybe 20 minutes or so.
Okay, okay. So in terms of process and how we're going to proceed, then staff can go ahead now and do their presentation. We're going to take a lunch break after that, probably for an hour, and then we'll resume right after lunch with the public comment portion. We'll begin then. Good morning.
Is it still morning? Good morning.
It is, barely.
For a few more minutes. For the record, my name is Dirk Danley. I'm a principal planner in the zoning section of community development. I've previously been accepted as an expert in the Lee Plan and Land Development Code, and would like to do so again today.
Yes, thank you.
The applicant's gone through a significant amount of the details of the request, so I'll try not to repeat what's already been put on the record, most of which is already in the staff report, but I did want to talk through some of the salient points and kind of talk about the conditions, the 48-hour letter, and just put some of that stuff on the record. So just from a high point, this is a request to rezone approximately 788 acres. Did I give you a PowerPoint?
You did not. Thank you. So that will be Staff Exhibit 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this request is to rezone approximately 788 acres from agricultural to residential planned development for a maximum of 1,099 dwelling units with private on-site recreation facilities and supporting infrastructure. A maximum of 35 feet is proposed, and the connection to water and sewer is required as part of this rezoning. The applicant did go through Lee Plan Policy 123.2.17, but we'll talk about those criteria a little bit more in our presentation to allow for that exceedance of 1 unit an acre to what they're requesting of 1.39 units per acre. This is the aerial of the site. It is approximately 788 acres. It does not have a lot of zoning history on it. It's currently used for agricultural purposes, and that's been its purpose, at least since we have written history of it. It is in the Northeast Lee County and North Olga community plan areas. The applicant has gone into detail on the master concept plan. Just to provide some context, it is proposed to be placed like this within the existing community. This is just being overlaid over the aerials today. I did want to make note of the fact that there are other developments adjacent to the community, and in the area overall that are definitely driving the development pressure within the area. And we did review those as part of our staff report to make sure that whatever was being requested in Cary+Duke+Povia was compatible and consistent with those also requested near it. The applicant did go through those decision-making criteria. They are in the staff report. We do find as conditioned that they are meeting the criteria overall. We'll talk about some of them as we go through. But just to begin the presentation, we are recommending approval with those conditions. Just to re-highlight the 123.2.17, there are 5 base criteria to be able to exceed that 1 unit per acre. The property is, of course, an exceedance of 10 acres. It is on North River Road, which is an arterial roadway. It must provide connection to water and sewer, which was achieved by the comp plan back in 2022. This is CPA 2219. It placed the property in the Lee County Utilities future water and sewer areas. That was approved on March 20th of this year by ordinance 24-6. And then there was 2 more criteria. We'll talk about those a little bit later about the environmental, but the applicant and their environmental consultants have gone into some detail on that. We may have some supplementary information on the back end of the presentation. The property is in the rural future land use category, which is characterized by low density residential uses and agricultural land. Not to sound like a broken record, but they are exceeding the future land use category standard density of 1 unit per acre based on that 123.2.17. There are approximately 70 acres of wetlands that are designated on the property. And overall, there's approximately 19 acres that are proposed to be impacted as part of the development. Objectives 2.1 and 2.2 encourage new growth in future urban areas where adequate and sufficient infrastructure exists. We kind of have to back into this policy a little bit because this is a rural area. But as they exceed that 1 unit per acre, they're required to provide some level of urban service. So we kind of back into this policy where that additional policy allows for a greater density, and they need that. So they do have bike pedestrian facilities. They do have access to Bayshore Fire Station currently. The applicant did bring up that fire station that's proposed in Babcock. The sheriff's station is able to adequately serve the area, and the utilities will be required through privately funded improvements. There is approximately 183 acres that are in the coastal high hazard area. They're predominantly in the southwest areas of the property. There's a mix of FEMA flood map zones in the area, but the property is kind of focused away from the coastal high hazard area in whatever ways it can to ensure that they're not, developing in those areas that would have some risk of that coastal high hazard area. And we'll talk about it later, but there's in goal, I believe it's 101, it speaks to only impacting wetlands that are in coastal high hazard areas I think it's for public purpose effectively. And in their analysis, I think it's less than 1/4 of an acre of those impacted wetlands that are proposed to be impacted within the coastal high hazard area. Policy 5.1.5 speaks to the encroachment of detrimental uses to existing and future residential areas. We have some extra analysis as we talk about that enhanced separation, some of those other conditions. But overall, this project is not inconsistent with what Babcock's proposed, what Hell Creek's proposed, and we find that this is a continuation of the development pattern in the area. But while we're looking at that policy 5.1.5, fortunately the goal 27 and 29 give us some extra parameters to work with to ensure that we're not being destructive to the character of the area, or at least provide minimal impact to the area. Policy 29.1.1, 27.1.1, and 27.1.6 all encourage clustering to get the residential uses away from the external boundaries of the project, which is why this project has come in this way, is that the LEED plan encourages that. 29.1.3 speaks to maintaining enhanced design standards for landscaping and signage and architectural standards to promote rural character. As you're well aware, the statutes prohibit us from regulating single-family home architecture. So we have provided a condition for basically everything else that can be visible externally, that they are compliant with those architectural standards that are in the Land Development Code for the North Olga area. Beyond that, the landscapings around in the area have already been significantly expanded simply by way of doing the rare and unique restoration and creation. This has kind of been the point of contention between staff and the applicant, is how to address policy 29.2.2. It does consider the fact that residential should provide some appropriate separation from existing large lot residential uses. There is an example in that LEED plan policy about 1 acre lots adjacent to the property. Staff's never been of the opinion that there has been abutting lots on this property, but it does provide a signal to the significance of that separation that the LEED plan's looking for. And so in our opinion, the most of the project is providing the appropriate amount of separation, particularly along the north and east side. Even, quite frankly, parts of the south side too are pretty close. But in terms of there's separation, and the purpose of that separation is to reduce the visual impact. And when you can't provide appropriate separation, that's why we said, well, let's have larger lots so the massing is reduced in the area. So the areas that we have issues with, and I'll note that the westernmost tract is probably the least problematic, because it's up against Owl Creek, which, as the applicant's already stated, they do have less so of a separation requirement because they're further west. They're closer to, I guess we'll call all the action of State Road 31. And in staff's opinion, they're appropriately separated with what they have. But there is the southwest corner that the applicant did bring up, that 60-foot choke point there, the area along Duke Highway, and in the area, I don't know how to call it, in the little nook between the second and third pod. The applicant did bring forth a condition to propose enhanced buffering to ameliorate those concerns. We haven't had a chance to look at those yet. They were just provided today for the first time. But in our opinion, at least, regardless of how the condition gets crafted, or if we have time to work as staff and the applicant to kind of come to a conclusion on that, but we do think that the scope of the concern is not just in that along Duke Highway, but it's along these other areas as well. Like I said, less so for the westernmost pod, but in this easternmost pod. So if you look in that space between pod 2 and pod 3, I don't want to scroll all the way back to the aerials, but there's residential uses right there, right adjacent to the development boundary, and we find that that's a critical area for us. The southwest little nook out it's not actually abutting Duke Highway anymore. It's a vacant lot, but it could be used for commercial, agricultural, or it could be used for a residential use. We don't know who the property owner is. I can't try to assume what will be placed there, but the property is entitled for one of those two things, so we do care about that piece as well. I think it's probably important to put on the record, we're more than willing to have a discussion about something that sufficiently addresses that concern. Just with what we walked into the hearing today, that large lot proposal is how staff has approached it at this point. Did you have any questions about that? Okay. So policy 101.1.1 speaks to maintaining the natural systems in the area. When you're in the coastal high hazard, they are maintaining, and quite frankly, with the preservation and restoration of rare and unique habitats adjacent to it, we do find that the creek that runs north-south between pod 1 and I believe pod 3, we're calling it, is being preserved, and they're quite frankly restoring some of those water movements as the applicants put on the record today. Additionally, with the habitat just overall throughout the site, we are finding them consistent with this policy as well. The policy 101.3.2, we did speak to that. There's about a quarter of an acre that's proposed to be impacted, and that has to go through the state processes. And we've provided conditions to make sure that that goes through everything appropriate at time of development order approval. The staff has reviewed this case. There's a handful of conditions within the staff report or in our conditions document to ensure that the water quality is being met, including a surface water and a groundwater management plan. So we do find them consistent with Goal 125 as well. Lee Plan encourages housing, to address housing through a mix of housing in the areas the county grows. The two types of dwelling units that they're proposing today does encourage that mix of uses, and we do find them consistent with this policy as well. And then just, I know the applicant had one of the representatives say that they're here to sell houses, which is true, but it is also consistent with Goal 158 to encourage a diversified and stable economy and a positive business climate. So we find the request is consistent with this goal as well. This next part is just kind of leaving the floor open for a moment. The next two pieces, Shane, and I forget the other person's name, the landscape architect from the applicant team, did go through a lot of this in detail. I believe that you had some questions on timing and phasing. Our staff is here with any questions that you may have about that. We'll kind of leave the floor open to you on that.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if you've reviewed the Owl Creek, but it caught my eye because it was a concern that I had throughout, is that you're getting the benefit of the additional density, but there's a 5-year look-back period on that essentially, because you've got to let time for all the restoration plantings and things to grow, which I understand, but construction is going to be happening simultaneous to that. And it looked like in Owl Creek, the way that they tied that together was that they limited the plat recordation of the additional lots until they had achieved certain benchmarks in the restoration planting. But I didn't see that in this conditioning for this case. And so I didn't know if that was something that had been looked at and it was being addressed some other way, or if it was something that we needed to include so that there is some tie to that happening in terms of timing.
Yeah, I think I would like to leave, if Beth has a chance to come. Explain the phasing on that.
Good afternoon. Now we crossed the noon mark, so it's officially
Good afternoon. For the record, Beth Workman. I'm a principal planner in the zoning section. I reviewed the environmental and wrote the staff report for the environmental portion of this. I've been accepted as an expert in this forum before for the Lee Plan and Land Development Code. I have been sworn in, and I wish to be accepted as an expert today as well.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, to answer your question, this is similar but different, and it has to do with the review process that went on. So when you are in reviewing these type of projects, and I've reviewed Bayshore Ranch, I've also reviewed Owl Creek. So I did the environmental on both of those projects that utilize the Lee Plan policy. So in the review process, you have a phasing plan that you may or may not get. Bayshore Ranch was built in one phase. They did everything up front. So as their development order came in, they had the whole entire infrastructure put in that development order, and then an internal phasing plan that tracked it. So as things were released, units were released. Staff cannot put conditions with building permits in the condition because we have it doesn't work with the tracking mechanism from how our residential permits are issued in the communication with development services to make sure that we have the specific restoration done to be able to build that house. So in Owl Creek's situation, it tied to the plat, which whenever you get a development order, you have a plat associated with that. So in this case, our condition that staff put in was prior to the issuance of the first development order. So before they do anything, that first development order must recognize the 420.20 acres of indigenous open space that's in substantial compliance. And then it goes A through H, which lays out the acreages for the rare and unique upland restoration, and so on.
Which condition number are you citing from?
Oh,
So
I
can
don't
follow.
have my staff report,
I'm
I'm sorry.
testing
I
your
don't have
brain. Is it the
condition.
open space? Okay, so it's condition 6, which is the open space requirement. Okay.
Thank you, Dirk. So that lays out that first DO. So that first development order comes in, it lays everything out. Within that development order, the pods come in. So however the applicant wants to release the pods, they'll have a phasing schedule built into that development order. Staff's experience on conditioning specific phasing and zoning is that we have a lot of amendments that come back through, because when you go to build a project, it doesn't always get built like it is on paper. So in the development order process, you have the phasing schedule that has associated the restoration. So as it goes through, then amendments will come in to add on to that. In the case of Babcock Ranch, they have an overall master plan, like this is conditioning. And then as the pods come in, they cite the restoration on the first development order that says, this is per this restoration and this much acreage that's been permitted per the DO. It gets very confusing because there's more than one way to do this, and it depends on the construction on site. So the way that staff treated this was, you submit the first development order, you lay out everything on that development order with future development order noted for any pods you're not going to construct on that first DO. And then you lay out all of the restoration, because we already have it laid out. It's conditioned in the zoning. We have management plans for all of this. Everything's been done except for the on-ground work. So the development order is where the rubber meets the road and everything gets released. So as they match up their pods and their units, they have their restoration that's going to be done associated with that pod. So that's kind of how, and then a plat is recorded on the overall, and then replats are done as things come online. And that's similar to the way that Babcock is operating. It's similar to the way that Owl Creek will be set up without the condition of the platting. We would have to work with the applicant to put that condition about platting in there. Staff would be up for that, because that would seal it, but with a development order, you get a plat. So whatever's shown on that development order, the plat rides with it.
Okay, and there would be no opportunity for them to amend the plat with the various things. My concern is tracking, just as you've said, because
Yep.
it does get very confusing, and
Yep.
so it's tracking and it's timing, because those two things go in tandem in these kind of cases. And the recordation of the conservation easement, they've got 5 years to do that.
5 years, it has to be recorded in a conservation easement within 5 years of the first development order. That first development order, as conditioned, lays out everything. So that starts the timing of the conservation easement. That conservation easement doesn't mean that the work needs to be done. It's just, that's set aside with the plat. The phasing plan within that first DO may show phase 1 is the easternmost pod or the westernmost pod that has so many units, and here's the restoration that's going with that. Future DO on the rest.
Okay.
And then as they come online, talking with development services staff when I was writing this, as well as when we had a meeting with the applicant about this, I checked with them to see how like Babcock's going. Babcock comes in with their pod, no restoration, because it's all on the first DO, and they reference it, and then staff tracks it. They have actual maps, and the applicant is required to provide that tracking at time of each DO. And there's three different housing builders in there, where with this one, we have Mr. Neal's.
Is that tracking mechanism, though, is it a condition of the DO or it's a condition of the zoning? And that's, again, I just want to be sure, because it was warranted in the property adjacent to this one to the west, and they're basically dipping in the same pool in terms of
Right.
getting this density pulled out. So I just want to be sure
Right.
if there's something in here that needs to tie it to that we've thought
So it has to
about.
do with how you work with the applicant. On Babcock, we had a percentage condition because the applicant was up for that. We have percentages. And the way that their state and federal permits are going for wildlife, the acreages are coming in over what is required for the units because of the way the permitting process is segmented with the state and the federal government. So they're always working ahead of schedule on their restoration. But we do have a tally going in the DOs that are coming in on the individual pods. On Owl Creek, it hasn't started yet. We have a development order in, but that has that condition about the platting. This one is similar to that with a condition about the platting, I agree, would help lock that in. We didn't have the opportunity to have a specific percentage condition. Babcock did it because there was multiple builders coming in there. So you've got, I mean, one builder comes in, they've got to track it and note what the other builder's doing on how you go in and color in each individual pod.
Okay.
The monitoring happens with that first DO. That's why staff has that all built into the first development order, because for compliance purposes and certificate of compliance, and then any violation with code enforcement, it goes to that one development order.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Does that help you?
It does, thank
Okay.
you. I appreciate the clarification.
Just to continue on, there was several public information meetings held by the applicant with the community. Records of those, the sign-in sheets, the meeting minutes, and everything else are included with the staff report. The applicant is seeking 5 deviations. They've gone through them to a point in their staff report. We are recommending approval of the 5 deviations. If you had any questions about those at this point, I'd be more than happy to answer them, but we are recommending approval with some conditions. Just to talk about the 48-hour letter and what was provided there. The second condition was the original one that they're providing an alternative for. And just to re-summarize, we are more willing to have a discussion about something that would sufficiently provide the separation or visual barrier that we're looking for. What you saw today, staff has not seen prior to this, and we would need some time to sort through what's possible at this point. In terms of the level of service condition with public safety, we did coordinate with public safety. They're an important component because particularly with EMS is they have to maintain a certain level of services, the ability to say, we're not going to make that level of service, so we can't provide you that. And so we wanted to make sure there's a condition that said if they're not able to provide that, or they weren't able to get emergency services at an appropriate response time, then that would have to wait until that new facility was constructed. Understanding that the applicant had a concern over the phrase sufficient level of service, this still does provide the emergency services to have the ability to say we can't provide it. And so this condition in our mind is still equally appropriate, and we're more than willing to recommend approval of that change in that condition.
Okay, so they wouldn't say that they had availability of services unless they were meeting the level of service, essentially?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last one with the transportation impacts, we did coordinate with DOT. The applicants also coordinated with DOT because that's where this condition came from. Just the fact that there's a maximum number of dwelling units assigned to this property, this would be applicable with or without the language. And so it is somewhat redundant, and we are in agreement to remove the condition. With that, we do find this request does meet decision-making criteria. We are recommending approval with some of the remaining issues to be discussed. I've got a short list so far of things. I'm assuming that after public comment, we may have more to discuss. But I just wanted to make sure you and I were in agreement on that. The construction traffic entrance, we might need to have a discussion about that with the applicant. The condition about the larger lot size with separation, that's still an ongoing issue. And then if we need to provide any clarification on those environmental conditions to ensure that the rare and unique creation is done in a timely manner, we'll certainly have another discussion about that as well. Is there anything else that you had note of before we get to public comment?
I want to check that before we recess. Give me one moment. Okay, no, that addressed everything for now. Okay, so with that, again, we're going to recess for 1 hour, so we'll reconvene at 1:15. When we do that, we will begin immediately with public comment, and we will go for as long as this afternoon as we can get. If we don't finish today, we will reconvene on Friday.
So thank you, everyone. I'll see you back at 1:15.